The beta test is over. The world's first VR, virtual reality MMORPG, Sword Art Online, is about to go live. Former beta tester Kirigaya Kazuto puts on his nerve gear and gets ready for the official launch. At 1 p.m. on Sunday, November 6, 2022, he is transported to the Town of Beginnings on the first floor of the virtual world Aincrad, under the name Kirito, his avatar. Klein, another player, notices that Kirito knows his way around and asks for help after confirming that he is indeed one of the lucky 1,000 beta testers. After showing Klein the ropes while hunting boars, the two decide to part ways, since Klein has a pizza already ordered and on its way. But they find the logout button missing from the menu and figure it must be some sort of bug. That is, until they're transported to the center of town where the game's creator, Kayaba Akihiko, dispels their suspicions. It's not a bug, it's a feature. He goes on to explain that removing the nerve gear each player has on will send a powerful microwave signal and fry their brain, should they choose to remove it, or if their health points reach 0. The only way to survive and log out is to clear all 100 floors by defeating the boss at the end of each before moving on to the next. With that, every player's avatar transforms to reflect their real-life appearance, and panic ensues. Kirito asks Klein to come with him to the next village, but Klein stays behind since he can't abandon his friends, and they part ways. Determined to clear the game, Kirito knows what he must do: become as strong as possible and survive. The first floor still hasn't been cleared a month later, while over 2,000 of the original 10,000 players have already lost their lives. Some of the stronger ones have a meeting to discuss how to find and tackle the boss. A player named Diabel reveals that his party discovered the boss room. Their plan is to lead a raid group comprised of multiple parties of 6 to overpower the boss. As a solo player, Kirito searches for a party to join, but he's out of luck, until he spots another solo player, Asuna, and suggests they form a party of 2. But before they can get ready, a player named Kibao asserts that ex-beta testers need to apologize for going on ahead and leaving the new players behind. Another player, Egil, stands up, putting Kibao in his place. The ex-beta testers are the ones writing and handing out guidebooks for free. The raid group sets out to face Ilfang the Kobold Lord. Using the guidebook's information, everything goes smoothly. That is, until the boss draws a Nodachi instead of a Talwar sword. This wasn't in the beta. Kirito tries to warn Diabel, but isn't fast enough. The boss makes quick work of him. Kirito tries to give him some health pots, but he refuses, admitting to being an ex-beta tester who's after the rare item given to the player who lands the final blow. Kirito and Asuna begin their assault on the boss, but one mistake sends him flying into her. Egil steps in, holding off the boss until they recover. Then Kirito delivers the final blow. It's over. The raid group begins to rejoice, everyone except for Kaibao, who accuses Kirito of being an ex-beta tester. To everyone's surprise, Kirito bursts out laughing. His demeanor changes. Now overconfident and cocky, he retorts that he's nothing like the other beta testers. He's the player who cleared the most floors during the beta. He's not a cheater, he's a beater. Asuna catches up to Kirito, who admits she's strong and advises her to join a guild instead of limiting herself by playing solo. Some months later, in an 11th floor tavern, the Moonlit Black Cats Guild raises a glass to thank Kirito for saving their lives. Despite being a solo player, he accepts their offer to join their guild, but hides his true level from the members. The guild leader messages him the next day, explaining that Sachi went missing. When Kirito finds her, she proposes that they run away. Instead of fighting, they could wait until someone else clears the game. He assures her that the guild is strong enough, that she shouldn't fear death, while making a promise to himself to protect them. The rest of the guild decides to go tackle a dungeon, while the leader buys them a house. They stumble across a hidden room, with only a chest in the center. Kirito suspects it's a trap, and tries to warn them. As the door seals shut, their teleportation crystals are useless. They're surrounded by mobs. One by one, Kirito watches helplessly as his fellow guild members die. Sachi turns to him, but he can't make out her last words. Kirito learns of a rare item that resurrects a fallen comrade, but it only drops from a secret boss that spawns on Christmas Day. Traveling to the spawn point, he finds Klein's guild has been following him, offering to help. But those aren't the only pursuers. The Divine Dragons Alliance shows up, and Klein promises to hold them off, giving Kirito enough time to find the boss and defeat him solo. After returning to find Klein's group still alive, Kirito tosses the rare item in the snow, telling Klein to keep it. It's of no use to him now. The moonlit black cats have been dead for months, and the item is only effective for 10 seconds after a player dies. Back at the inn, Kirito receives a recorded message. It's from Sachi, explaining how grateful she was for his friendship and how she doesn't want him to blame himself for her inevitable death. Silica, a beast tamer, leaves her party after an argument with another member, Rosalia. She gets lost trying to find her way back to the town of Mish. Surrounded by a group of monsters in the forest, Silica's pet, Pina, steps in to protect her, sacrificing her life in the end. Without any healing crystals, Silica's odds are not looking good, but luck is on her side, as Kirito happens upon her and slays the circling foes. He asks Silica if the feather Pina dropped is a named item. It turns out it's her familiar's heart. Kirito tells her the rumor of a rare item that can revive any tamed beast within 3 days of its death, while promising to help her retrieve it. Rosalia mocks Silica back in town, assuming that they're heading to the Hill of Memories to revive Pina. Silica doesn't understand why she's such a vile player, so Kirito explains how some MMO players roleplay evil characters, but in SAO it's a different story. The cursor above a player's head turns orange when the player commits a crime, and turns red when they get a PK, player kill, which is murder under these circumstances. That night, Kirito hears someone outside of their room at the inn. They are being watched. The next morning, they port to floor 47, where the Hill of Memories is located. Silica wonders why he's helping her. To Kirito's embarrassment, he admits that she reminds him of his sister. Eventually, they find the item and decide to wait to revive Pina in town where it's safe. However, on the way back to the transporter, Kirito notices someone lying in wait. It's Rosalia. It turns out she's part of a PK guild, Titan's Hand, despite having a green cursor. She's the bait. Rosalia believes she was hunting them, but it was actually Kirito who was tracking her. Silver Flag's guild leader survived his guild's massacre, begging anyone who would listen to avenge his friends and put her in prison where she belongs. The rest of Titan's Hands come out of hiding, recognizing Kirito, dressed in black, one-handed sword, no shield. Attacking all at once doesn't even scratch him. At level 78, with enough battle regen bonuses, he's practically invincible. There's nothing Rosalia can do. Kirito transports her to prison and takes Silica back to town, apologizing for using her as bait. She revives Pina, and they part ways, promising to meet again someday. Asuna, now vice commander of the Knights of the Blood Oath, holds a meeting with the assault team on floor 56, going over boss-killing strategies. Asuna is adamant about her plan to lure the boss into town, but Kirito objects. She insists that NPCs aren't people. After all, they respawn. Aegil mentions the growing tension between them, reminding Kirito of the advice he gave her and how far she's come. A few weeks later, on floor 59, Asuna finds Kirito taking a nap in the shade of a tree. She tries lecturing him, but he insists that it's the optimal weather in Aincrad. It would be a waste not to enjoy it. Kirito wakes up to find Asuna fast asleep and decides to keep watch. She treats Kirito to a meal to thank him for making sure no one killed her while she slept. Someone screams, and they rush outside to see a player hanging from a balcony with a spear piercing his chest. Moments later, he's gone, dead, vanished. But nobody can die in a safe zone, and there isn't a red cursor in sight. They decide to investigate. Yoruko, the player who screamed, steps forward, claiming she was friends with the victim, Kynes. With the witness in tow, they retrieve the one thing that might give them some answers, the murder weapon. Aegil doubles as a night merchant and has a high enough appraisal skill to determine the weapon's owner. The spear was crafted by a player named Grimlock. Apparently, Yoruko recognizes the name and details the destruction of her old guild, Golden Apple. They found a rare ring and voted in favor of selling it. Griselda, the leader, tried to sell it and turned up dead, leaving her in-game husband, Grimlock, a widower. The third person who wanted to keep the ring, along with Yoruko and Kynes, was Schmidt, who left the guild to fight on the front lines with the Divine Dragons Alliance. Kirito figures there are only 3 possible ways to die in a safe zone: a fair duel, a bug, or an item or skill. But he rules out the last option, since the game system is fair and wouldn't contain anything that would violate the only safe place for players. They get Schmidt to meet with them, when Yoriko begins to freak out, inching ever closer to the window. Sitting on the sill, she reasons that Griselda is the only one with motive to kill. It must be her ghost seeking revenge, when suddenly her eyes widen and she falls from the second-floor window with a dagger in her back, dead. Kirito spots a cloaked figure watching from a nearby rooftop, but before catching up to the anonymous player, they use a teleportation crystal and escape. Schmidt starts spiraling, believing that Griselda's ghost has returned to seek revenge. That night, Kirito and Asuna sit on a bench, wondering if it was really Griselda's ghost. But why would a ghost need a teleportation crystal? Kirito is surprised that Asuna can cook. When she offers him some food, he fumbles, and the food disappears when it hits the ground. Kirito has an epiphany. He knows how they've been pulling off the killings. Schmidt visits Griselda's grave when 2 mysterious figures appear in front of him. Terrified, he confesses. After the vote, he found a teleportation crystal in his inventory, along with written instructions to bind it to the room Griselda was staying at, swearing he had no idea who gave him the orders. Kirito explains to Asuna that a player's health points can't drop to 0 inside a safe zone, but an item's durability can. Kain's armor lost all its durability, and right when it disintegrated, he used a crystal to teleport, creating a convincing enough death. Yoriko never turned around, so the dagger was already taking the durability of her cloak down to 0 the moment she fell out the window. Just when Schmidt finishes confessing and begging for forgiveness, 3 cloaked figures appear and paralyze him, members of the Laughing Coffin, a murder guild. However, they decide to depart when Kirito shows up at Griselda's grave. Asuna explains that when players marry in-game, their inventory and storage become shared between them. But what happens when one dies? Everything goes to the spouse, so the ring must still be in Grimlock's possession. It must have been him who hired Griselda's murderer. Asuna finds Grimlock lurking in the forest near the gravesite. He tries to justify why he had to kill her, revealing that they were married in the real world too. She changed when they began playing SAO, and he just couldn't take it. Kynes and Yoriko ask to deal with Grimlock themselves, taking him away. Asuna asks Kirito what he would do if his wife changed. He replies that he would be happy, definitely not reason enough to resort to murder. They turn around and see Griselda's ghost, and Asuna asks Kirito to friend her. Asuna visits her blacksmith friend, Liz, on her day off, missing Kirito, who shows up after she leaves. He asks if she has any swords as strong or stronger than his elucidator. She presents him with the strongest sword she has ever made. He asks to test its durability by trying to break his own sword with it. Liz is dumbfounded as she watches her sword snap in half with a single strike. If she had the right materials, she could forge a blade of equal caliber. On floor 55, there's a dragon who eats crystals and stores a rare metal in its stomach, but he needs a master smith with him to get the drop. The 2 ascend a snowy mountain to reach the dragon's lair, but Kirito tells Liz to hide while he fights, despite her insisting that she can help. Distracted, they both get thrown into a giant circular pit where they can't use teleportation crystals. The only way out is up. Kirito takes a running start and tries to scale the walls, to no avail. The 2 decide to camp out at the bottom for the night. When Liz wakes up, she finds Kirito digging through the snow. He discovers the rare ore they were after. They're in the dragon's lair, and the ore is really the dragon's excrement. It turns out they're nocturnal too, Liz mentions, as the dragon dives into the hole to greet them good morning, sending them flying. At least it's one way to get out. Liz forges the perfect sword. It's exactly what Kirito was looking for. She refuses to accept payment. Instead, she demands to become his own personal smith. Right as she begins to confess her feelings for Kirito, Asuna bursts through the door. It's pretty clear that there's something between the 2 of them. Almost 2 years have passed since launch, and Kirito is still flying solo. While traversing a forest, a rare animal crosses Kirito's path, a ragu rabbit. After catching it, he brings the S-rank ingredient to Egil, attempting to sell it since neither of them has a high enough cooking skill to prepare it. If only they knew someone who did. Asuna taps Kirito on the shoulder, with another Knight of the Blood Oath member in tow. She informs them that she's just maxed out her cooking skill and agrees to cook the rabbit if they split it evenly. Since Kirito doesn't have any cookware at his place, she decides to invite him over for dinner, to his surprise. She then dismisses her bodyguard, Kurudil, who takes offense that she thinks Kirito is more than capable of doing his job. After dinner, Asuna confesses that she's concerned that the game is becoming too challenging for a solo player and decides to ask, more like force, Kirito to join her and become a party of 2. The next morning, Asuna teleports to meet Kirito before they head to the dungeon. But Kurudil is close behind them and confronts Kirito, challenging him to a duel to see who is more fit to protect Asuna. The battle begins, but it's over with a single swing. Kurudil's sword is broken at the hilt, but he refuses to accept the loss. They fight their way through the dungeon on the 74th floor. Kirito is impressed and relieved to fight with someone who knows what they're doing. After a while, they come across the boss room. Teleportation crystal in hand, they push the great doors open to find a giant blue-eyed demon. The braziers light up the room, and the 2 of them turn in a panic to escape from the chamber. Asuna interrogates Kirito. Why doesn't he use a shield as a one-handed sword user? But she drops it when he becomes uncomfortable. She pulls out a picnic basket filled with food she made. She's been discovering how to emulate real-world food and flavors. Klein's guild shows up and wonders why Kirito is in a party as a solo player, especially with a girl. While the guys fawn over Asuna, the army, a guild that operates on the 1st floor, appears, demanding the map data Kirito recorded. He doesn't put up a fight, since he was going to share the information for free anyway. Noticing how beat up and exhausted the army members are, they try to warn them against tackling the boss in such a state, but the army leader ignores them and they head for the boss. Kirito and Asuna sprint to the door, hearing multiple people scream. They can't use their teleportation crystals, just like the hidden room where Kirito lost the black cats. The army group's leader goes down, dying in front of them. There's no choice but to try and save as many people as possible. Kirito holds off the boss so the others can escape. He can't let them die. He has to reveal the reason why he only uses one-handed swords. He acquired the ability to dual wield, a skill no one else has ever seen. Faster. He has to go faster. Kirito unleashes an insane flurry of blows, leaving him the only one standing, only for about 2 seconds before he collapses with only a sliver of health left. Klein demands to know what that was, a unique skill that isn't on any list or guide. Kirito must move out of his home because nobody will leave him alone after his secret is publicized. But that's not the only bad news. Asuna takes Kirito to speak with Heathcliff, the leader of the Knights of the Blood Oath. He isn't exactly thrilled that Kirito is poaching one of their best members and challenges him to a duel. If he loses, he must become a member of the guild. Kirito isn't the only one with a unique skill. Heathcliff is the sole user of Divine Blade, a skill that maximizes both attack and defense. No one's ever seen his hit points dip into the yellow zone. The arena is completely packed as both fighters prepare to duel. Kirito tries to use his speed to his advantage, but wasn't expecting the captain's shield proficiency. His guard breaks, and Kirito lands a blow. Heathcliff was not prepared for that. Another opening. This is it. But for some reason, time slows down, and his attack fails. It's over. The Knights of the Blood Oath just gained their newest member. Asuna wonders why he adamantly refuses to join a guild and learns the truth. The guilt Kirito carries for not saving the Midnight Black Cats made him swear never to join another guild. It's training time. As if anything could be worse, he's paired with Kurudil, but their superior, Godfrey, reassures Kirito. After stopping for a lunch break, Kirito notices Godfrey go down. He's paralyzed. Unable to use any crystals after relinquishing them for training, there's nothing Kirito can do while he watches Kurudil murder their superior. While making his way over to finish Kirito off, he reveals that he's actually a member of the Laughing Coffin. With his life waning fast, he refuses to die and tries to fight the paralysis. Good thing Asuna was following them the whole time. She turns her attention to her former bodyguard, but believes his feigned surrender. Right as Kurudil is about to attack Asuna, Kirito steps in, taking the blow directly to his forearm, sacrificing his right hand to save her, and viciously attacking their assailant. There's no way around it now. Kirito is a murderer. Kirito kisses Asuna to dispel any doubts, and they promise to protect each other no matter what. They spend the night together and decide to take a break from the front line for a while. He suggests they get a house by the lake on floor 22, and then they can get married. Heathcliff approves their requested time off. They buy the lake house and get married. After relaxing for a while, Kirito becomes restless. He tells Asuna he has a surprise while taking her into the woods. He heard rumors of townsfolk seeing ghosts in the forest. As soon as the words leave his mouth, Asuna spots a small girl wearing white wandering through the trees. But it's no ghost. Another player, perhaps? But she doesn't have a cursor. And yet, she's not an NPC or a quest giver. They bring her back to the cottage. In the morning, the girl finally wakes up after passing out right after they found her. Her name is Yui, but as for the rest of her memories, she can't seem to recall anything. Yui starts calling them mommy and daddy after having a tough time pronouncing Kirito. They decide to see if anyone knows her in the town of beginnings, since it's their best shot at finding her parents, or at least someone who knows her. About 30% of the players still alive are on the first floor, around 2,000. Most of the residents are low-level players who don't wish to fight, but it's also where the army has taken root. They stumble upon a patrol extorting a group of children. Asuna makes quick work of them. Suddenly, Yui starts reaching for the sky, saying something about everyone's hearts and always being in the dark, when a loud hissing white noise comes out of nowhere as Yui faints. They take Yui back to the church, where a player has been taking care of all the kids in the game, but she's never seen Yui before. Yulier, the army's second-in-command, appears at the door, thanking them for putting the soldiers in their place and requesting their help. She details how the guild has become corrupt and more brazen, sending members to their deaths on the upper floors. The massacre they witnessed was on Kibao's orders, and now he's trying to get rid of Thinker, the guild leader. He lured Thinker to a dungeon below the town of beginnings, telling him to come unarmed, just to talk. But Kibao left him there to die. Asuna is skeptical, but Yui affirms that Yulier is telling the truth. Kirito decides to take the chance, and Yui insists on joining them. Thinker is still alive in a safe zone, but when they get close, he warns that it's a trap. But it's too late. They're face to face with a boss whose level is too high for them to see. There's no way they can beat him. That is until Yui steps between them. Revealing herself to be an immortal object, she begins hovering and summons a huge flaming sword, destroying the boss with a single blow. Yui's memories are finally restored. Yui explains how the system is run by the Cardinal program and that she's an AI meant to aid players' mental states. But trapped and alone, she could only watch while her programming slowly broke down. One day, she found two players who felt joy for the first time since the game launched, Kirito and Asuna, so she set out to find them. However, when Yui uses the GM console to delete the boss, the main Cardinal program locates and begins erasing her. Kirito jumps into action. Using the GM console, he creates an in-game item containing Yui's program. After their 2-week vacation, Kirito and Asuna receive an urgent summons from Heathcliff, requesting their return to the front line. He debriefs them on the latest developments. A 20-member recon team scouted a boss. Half of them got trapped in the center of the anti-crystal boss chamber. When it was over, the room was completely empty, no trace of the players or the boss. Kirito asks Asuna to stay behind, but she tells him if anything happened, she wouldn't be able to go on living without him. The next day, everyone gathers to get ready to face the boss. Even Klein and Agil are there to help. The raid group charges into the room, but it's completely empty. Well, not completely. The Skull Reaper drops from the ceiling. It mows down players with ease, one-shotting anyone who can't negate the damage. Players are going down one after the other. But if Kirito and Asuna block together, they have a chance of survival, no matter how slim. Success. They pull off the impossible, but they still have 25 more floors left. Is it even possible to survive, let alone clear them all? Kirito notices that Heathcliff's health hasn't turned yellow. Thinking back to their duel, it suddenly hits him. He launches an attack against the captain, only to see the same immortal object indicator that Yui had. Something had been bugging Kirito. Why create an RPG if you aren't going to play it? Captain Heathcliff is Akihiko Kaiba, the creator of SAO. It first occurred to him during their duel, when Kaiba increased his speed to win, claiming that Kirito was too fast and strong. He would have lost if he didn't cheat. He confirms his true identity, revealing that he is the final boss. Kaiba always thought he'd face off with Kirito at the end. Before he leaves for the 100th floor, he gives Kirito a chance to duel. If he wins, he clears the game and all remaining players are logged out safely. Despite his friend's warnings, this could be their only chance to survive. Kirito thanks them for everything before preparing to fight Kaiba, making him promise not to allow Asuna to commit suicide should he lose. This isn't a game. This is a fight to the death. Using skills that Kaiba didn't design is his best bet, but it's not enough. He's wide open, and Kaiba is already saying sayonara. Before he can do anything, Asuna comes between them, sacrificing herself. Kaiba plunges his sword into Kirito's chest, taking his health points to 0. But Kirito refuses to die. He spears the captain with his sword, killing both of them simultaneously. He's transported to a platform in the sky, along with Asuna and Kaiba, who can't really give a good reason as to why he created SAO. It was merely to create the world he's always dreamed of, one where he was in control. Kirito and Asuna embrace, knowing that their time together was the happiest either of them had ever been, until Kazuto awakens in the hospital, determined to find Asuna in the real world. He's back at their home on the 22nd floor, sitting on their porch, with Asuna asleep beside him. Inside, an apple falls off the table. Suddenly, the world starts falling apart. The sky turns red, and space starts to crumble away. He's Kirito, dressed as the Black Swordsman again, when Kazuto wakes up with a start from another nightmare. After spending 2 years in Sword Art Online, he still hasn't fully adjusted. Sugu, his sister, still practiced kendo in between hospital visits while he was comatose. Kazuto challenges her to spar. She notes him taking an odd stance. He's still used to the weight of a real sword, but ends up losing anyway. When Sugu asks what he's up to, Kazuto looks at the ground and solemnly says he's visiting the hospital again to see Asuna. She's still in a coma 2 months after the incident. He told the Ministry of Internal Affairs everything he knew about SAO in return for her location. While visiting the hospital, Asuna's father appears, thanking him for visiting his daughter so often. He knows it would make her happy. His business partner's son, Nobuyuki Sugo, shows up ecstatic to meet the bona fide hero Kirito in person. Her father leaves the two alone, and Sugo gives up the act. Apparently, Sugo is eager to tie the knot, marrying into Asuna's family. Kazuto's face turns to horror when he mentions marrying the girl he loves. The company Argus was forced into bankruptcy, but the SAO servers were taken over by Wrecked Progress, Asuna's father's company, where Sugo works. He claims he has a right to her, since he's the one working to keep the servers alive, and Asuna by extension. Threatening Kazuto if he ever comes back to visit, he gives him the concession of inviting him to the wedding, infuriating Kazuto. Back at home, Kazuto breaks down as Sugu comforts him. It turns out that they are technically not siblings, but still, she doted on him the entire time that he was under. Unable to truly express how she feels, she also breaks down and falls asleep next to him. The next morning, Kazuto tries waking her up. When she comes to, she starts freaking out, her face turning bright red. She runs out of the room. Kazuto receives an email from Aegil with a picture of someone who looks like Asuna. Kazuto goes to meet Aegil, IRL, at his bar to inquire about the picture he sent. It turns out that it's a screenshot from another VR MMO, Alfheim Online, basically SAO's successor, though now with more fairies and less murder. Apparently, there's an area called the World Tree at the center of the map where the screenshot was taken. Though nobody has made it to the top, there's another screenshot of a birdcage that was taken by someone who came close. Kazuto asks to borrow Aegil's copy and notices that it's made by Wrecked Progress. Sugu thinks about the night before when Kazuto shows up, startling her. He thanks her for last night. He's still not quite sure how to deal with the psychological burden the past few years have placed on his shoulders. He dons the nerve gear once again, choosing one of the 9 races, a Spriggan, naming himself Kirito. He's teleported into the game and begins falling, only to freeze mid-air. Something's not right. a black pixelated void opens, sending him to the middle of a forest. Checking the menu, he's relieved to find the choice to log out. He still has all his gear and skills from SAO. A bug? Remembering a certain unique item, he frantically searches, relieved when he finds and uses it to revive Yui. She still has her memories from SAO. After asking her to assess the system, Yui analyzes the game and finds that it's basically an SAO port. After Argus went under, Wrecked Progress took the reins. Apparently, he has the same character data, and everything that's compatible was transferred over, except for all his items, which he deletes before error detection notices. He still has his skills though. He's not a beater. He's a cheater. Yui is being identified as a navigation pixie though, and she doesn't have admin privileges. He tells her that Mommy might be trapped at the World Tree, and he's there to save her. But before they can get going, she alerts him to players in the area. 2 fairies wearing green, Leafa and Rekon, are fending off multiple enemies wearing red. When Rekon dies and Leafa becomes cornered, Kirito steps in, falls in, and overpowers them, killing 2 while the third would rather not lose anything and runs away. Leafa decides not to fight after seeing his ludicrous display, and Yui pops out, calling him daddy, which she finds odd, obviously. She teaches him to fly without using the controller, which he immediately gets the hang of, as they head to a sylph, another race's, town. Rekon is overjoyed to see Leafa, but she decides to ditch their party in favor of getting a drink with Kirito. He asks about the World Tree. Nobody has made it, since all races can only fly for a maximum of 10 minutes. Whoever's race makes it to the top first gets unlimited flight time. Kirito becomes frustrated. There must be a way to make it to the top. He has to, no matter what. Leafa is curious as to why. His demeanor changes, and he explains that there's someone he needs to find. He thanks her and walks out. But before he can leave, she stops him and offers to help. They both log off, promising to meet tomorrow. Meanwhile, in the birdcage at the top of the World Tree, someone calls the girl sitting there longingly to Tanya, indulging in her misery. She demands Sugo, the system admin, call her by her real name, Asuna. But he taunts her, saying he's Obeiron, the Fairy King, and she's his bride. He's been using 300 test subjects from SAO as guinea pigs in his experiment. He's attempting to alter people's memories and influence their emotions, and plans to take over Wrecked and sell the company. Asuna threatens to call the police when she wakes up, though she's terrified when she finds out she's one of the 300. Trying to learn the door code is futile as it's blurred out. She falls to her knees, pleading for Kirito to find her and save her. Sugu fell in love with Alfheim after becoming curious about why Kazuto was so enamored with VR gaming, despite her resentment towards them for stealing 2 years of her brother's life. Rekon, Shinichi, confronts Sugu in real life, informing her that Sigurd and the rest of the party are getting together later, but she refuses to join them. Both siblings log on and meet up in-game, but before they can dip, Sigurd and 2 of his lackeys show up, demanding she stay with the party, while taking the RP in RPG a little too seriously. Leafa tells them to beat it, with Kirito backing her up. Before he can make a scene, Sigurd's henchmen remind him not to sully his name by attacking a mere Spriggan renegade, and they storm off in a ridiculously exaggerated fashion. Yet again, the pair are interrupted. This time it's Rekon, the spineless, trademarked, who bravely offers Leafa his sword, only to immediately rescind the offer to stay behind and do some recon. Sigurd and co. are acting even more, but this time it's shady. Back in the cage, Sugo is still being a creep. He continues provoking Asuna, revealing that he knows Kirito is Kazuto. He explains his plan to marry her unconscious body and even sent Kazuto an invitation. He leaves, and she learns the key code by looking in a mirror. Kirito and Leafa decide to take a rest. Since they're not in town, they have to log out separately and watch the other's avatar. Sugu goes first, almost checking on her brother, but she decides not to, confused about her feelings for both him and now Kirito. When Kirito logs off, Yui can act independently, and Leafa wonders about their relationship. Flustered when Kirito logs back on, Leafa explains tracking magic when he becomes suspicious of someone following them. They have to travel through an underground mountain pass where Kirito practices his illusion magic, which is useless in combat, according to Leafa. Yui notices around 12 players following them. Trying to hide, Kirito sees a bat with red eyes. It's salamander tracking magic. They book it to the underground town. Before they make it to the gates, a magic wall appears, blocking their way. It looks like they'll have to make a stand. Kirito tells Leafa to stay back and act as support as he charges the salamander's forces. But they're throwing everything they have at him. He gets rocked by fireballs, one after another, but he keeps getting back up. Leafa keeps healing him while telling him dying is only a minor setback. She's taken aback when his whole demeanor changes. As long as he's still kicking, nobody dies on his watch. Never again. Kirito screams while charging the salamanders. Yui realizes he's going all out and tells Leafa to use the rest of her mana pool to heal him during his next attack. Leafa doesn't really know what's going on, but shields him anyway. He's using illusion magic? Kirito turns into the blue-eyed demon, who's blue-eyed in name only, and goes berserk, killing all but one. He offers the survivor all the loot from the fight for information. Apparently, there's a salamander army on the move, but he doesn't know why. Leafa logs off and checks her phone, discovering that she has a ridiculous number of missed calls from Shinichi. She answers the next call, discovering that Sigurd is a traitor working with the salamanders. Logging back on, she tells Kirito she has to go. There's a conference between the Sylphs and the Cat Seeds, which is where the salamander army will strike, ruining any chance of an alliance. Leafa says she'd understand if Kirito switched sides for a better chance to reach the World Tree. But he explains that even if it's a virtual world, there are some things you have to protect, still feeling guilty about the blood on his hands. They make a run for the exit and fly as fast as they can to the meeting place. They make it just in time. Leafa tells the Sylphs leaders to trust him. He's their only shot at saving their peace talks. Kirito confronts Eugene, the salamander commander, claiming to be an ambassador for the Spriggan-Undine alliance. If he makes a move, all 4 factions will wage war against the salamanders. But Eugene doesn't believe a lone Spriggan with trash gear is an ambassador and challenges him. If Kirito can last 30 seconds, he'll take him at his word. Eugene's sword can phase through any sword or shield used to block it. Allegedly, he's the most powerful player. He rescinds his word after 30 seconds are up. It's a fight to the death. After disappearing in a cloud of smoke, Kirito borrows Leafa's sword and attacks from above, surprising Eugene. The sword can't phase through attacks. His dual wielding is unparalleled. After beating Eugene, the player who fled when Kirito first saved Leafa, he lies, saying he saw him with an Undine the other day. Convinced he's an ambassador, Eugene orders retreat. Leafa explains the situation to the Sylph and the Cat Seeds leaders. Sigurd's even slimier than a salamander. The Sylph's leader uses a mirror to contact him and banishes him for being a traitor. Kirito admits to making everything up, saying he's just a sword for hire. He gives them enough money to prepare for their assault on the World Tree, the reason for their alliance in the first place. Once they're ready, they promise to help him on his quest. Back at the World Tree, the bird has left the nest, or cage. When the two arrive in Alrun, the largest city in Alfheim, and the base of the World Tree, they hear an announcement informing players that servers will be unavailable for maintenance. Asuna, now free, tries to find a GM console to log out, only to find a room filled with holographic brains seemingly in some sort of pain. It's the data center for Sugo's experiments. In the real world, Sugu is disappointed when Kazuto declines to hang out with her in favor of visiting Asuna. She asks to go to the hospital with him. On the bus, Kazuto explains that they're setting up a school specifically for SAO survivors. Meanwhile, Asuna hides from 2 purple creatures running the experiments. Looking for the console, she's captured before she can log out. The boss tells them to put her back in the cage and change the code. She manages to steal a GM access code. At the hospital, Sugu realizes that it might have been a mistake to go there. After they log back in, Kirito tries comforting Leafa, who breaks down, saying she just got her heart broken. Nobody can ever know she's in love with her own brother. Yui confirms that Asuna is at the top of the tree, according to her player ID. Despite knowing that flying to the top is impossible, Kirito, overwhelmed with emotions, immediately takes off without thinking. The barrier blocks him, but Yui's voice breaks through. Asuna drops the access card. Catching it only confirms his fears, making him even more determined. Leafa warns him again how impossible it is to reach the top, even with an army of players, let alone by himself. He refuses to listen and enters the dome, taking on the grand quest. With his anger fueling him, he quickly cuts down the first wave. But his will alone isn't enough to fend off the army of enemies guarding the World Tree. The screen flashes a message he thought he'd never see. You're dead. He thought he could do anything, that he was unstoppable as a solo player. But even in SAO, he couldn't do it alone. Leafa rushes in and recovers his flame before it disappears, reviving him on the steps to the dome. She tries to talk him down, but he won't listen. He has to save Asuna. Leafa is in shock. She can't believe it. Kazuto? Eyes wide, he realizes it's been Sugu the whole time. But before he can say anything, she logs out. It's not fair. She lies dazed before bursting into tears. She tells Kazuto to leave when he knocks on her door. She answers, confessing her feelings for him. She knows they're not brother and sister. He became so distant when he found out as a child. She realized she was in love with him. Jealous of the way he talks about Asuna, she tried to move on, but ended up falling in love with him all over again as Kirito. Unable to look her in the eye, he apologizes, while she tells him off and closes the door. He was only 10 when he found out. Always feeling different, he distanced himself, playing online games to cope. Kazuto tells her to meet in-game. She logs on to find Rekon, who confesses his love for her, only to be kicked down some stairs while she laughs, unsure of what to say. Leafa meets Kirito at the North Terrace of Alrun, and she challenges him to a rematch. They begin dueling, but end up embracing midair. Kirito confesses that he hasn't returned to the real world yet. He's still stuck in SAO. The game never ended for him. But if he can save Asuna, maybe he can save himself at the same time. Yui analyzes the Guardians. They're not very strong, but there are so many that beating the quest seems impossible by design. Rekon tries to help them, but the Guardians are overwhelming. Even when Rekon uses a self-destruct spell, clearing the way, the Guardians still swarm like a plague of locusts. It's hopeless, until the Sylphs and the Catseeds show up, after preparing for the raid with the money Kirito gave them. Leafa throws him her sword. With the help of the other players, he forces his way through the swarming Guardians and pierces the door in the ceiling. But Yui discovers that players aren't meant to open it. The quest really is unbeatable. If he can't beat it, it's time to cheat it. Yui uses the access card's code to override the door. He's in. They teleport to the hallway Asuna found herself in after her first attempt at escape. Yui uses her limited abilities to create a path. There's no city at the top. It's all a lie. They find Asuna, but can't log her out. She remembers where the console is, so there's a chance when Kirito suddenly falls to the floor, unable to move. Yui disappears, warning them there's something coming. It's Sugo. He taunts Kirito, revealing his experiment and the truth about Alfheim. Cackling, confident that he's won, he chains Asuna up by the wrist. Sugo stabs Kirito with his own sword while using admin privileges to decrease the pain threshold, while Kirito watches, powerless. On the verge of blacking out, Kirito hears a voice asking if he's giving up. Was their battle a joke? It's Kayaba, giving him the will to go on and his own admin privileges, which outrank Sugo's. He tries summoning Excalibur, which Kirito gladly does for him. He picks up his own sword and decreases the pain absorber to 0, enough to affect their bodies in real life. Kirito cuts him down with ease, severing his right hand. He tosses Sugo into the air, piercing him with his sword as Sugo falls, crying and screaming. After freeing Asuna, he breaks down. He's not a hero. He doesn't have any power. Regardless, he's her hero if nobody else's. She logs out, and he promises to visit her in the hospital as soon as he can. He asks Kayaba, or at least the digital ghost of whatever's left of him, if it's over, and he hands Kirito a golden egg he calls the seed. Maybe Kayaba wasn't just bored after all. Upon waking up, Sugu is standing over him, overjoyed that he's okay. Kazuto begins apologizing, but she says it's okay. Go to her, which is exactly what he does. When he arrives at the hospital, something slices his right arm. It's Sugo, stepping out of the shadows with a knife. He's lost it and threatens to kill Kazuto, calling him weak. Finding his will to live, he disarms Sugo. Overcome with rage and plagued by memories, holding the knife to Sugo's throat, Kazuto comes to his senses before following through. In the hospital, Asuna is finally awake, and they meet for real at last. A few months later, they begin their first semester at the SAO Survivors School. Sugo was arrested that night in the parking lot, and VR MMOs fell by the wayside after all the terrible tragedies and human experimentation that befell the players. Apparently, Kayaba committed suicide, but Kazuto knows he successfully uploaded his consciousness. He spoke with him when he received the World Seed, saying he'd know what to do with it. All of the players they've befriended meet up at Agil's bar. The seed has been spreading since they released it to the public. It turns out that it's a program allowing for the creation of VR MMORPGs, which are springing up all over. They even recreate the floating castle from SAO in Alfheim. This time, he swears he's going to beat all 100 floors. In the VR MMORPG Gun Gale Online, people watch as the top players speak on an MMO panel about the upcoming tournament, when a player, boasting about having real power, shoots the player on a TV airing the broadcast. The patrons in the bar begin to laugh, until the broadcast cuts away while the player seems to suffocate. There's a mask covering the shooter's face. He calls the weapon and himself Death Gun. In the real world, Kazuto and Asuna meet up for a date 1 year after the SAO incident. They talk about how the only difference separating their world from the vast array of new virtual ones is merely the amount of data. Someday, AR might be advanced enough to revive Yui in real life. Kazuto meets with the first person who visited him in the hospital, the head of the government's VR division, Kikuoka. At a cafe, they discuss this strange occurrence of 2 top GGO players dying of heart failure. They both agree it isn't possible to stop a heart from in-game bullets. He convinces Kazuto to investigate in-game. Meanwhile, Sinon, a sniper playing GGO, picks off targets, alluding to how much easier it is to pull a virtual trigger. Using a special rifle, Hecate, a reward for killing a boss solo, Sinon hunts other players in a group, hitting the first target, an instant kill. But the party of monster hunters has a new member this time, covering their equipment with a cloak. They're moving slower than usual. When Sinon misses the cloaked figure, he reveals the minigun on his back. Live ammo, not optical rounds for hunting monsters. This guy's obviously here for PvP. One of her group members goes down before she warns them. After seeing him smile, Sinon vows to take him down. Dine, the party leader, would rather log out than face him, but Sinon says she only needs them to distract him for 3 seconds. Dine ends up sacrificing himself, but not before going out with a bang, taking 2 of them with him. She finds a new vantage point, but the hired gun spots her before getting a shot off. Taking a page out of Dine's book, she leaps from the window, directly into his line of fire. She loses a leg getting close enough to put one between his eyes, glad she could wipe the smile off his face. She takes off her ammosphere and tries to make a gun with her hand, still not quite able to. She says she needs to get stronger. In ALO, Kirito stares at the floating castle, Aincrad, having flashbacks to SAO and Kayaba. He sits up, looking at Asuna. There's something he needs to tell her. Shino is led into an alley where some girls try extorting her. She tells them off, but when one of the girls makes a gun with her hand, Shino freezes, going into shock while the girls taunt her. Someone yells for the cops, and the bullies book it. Shinkawa shows up to help Shino, and they go to a cafe to discuss the BOB tournament in GGO. He offers to walk her home. Declining, she says walking alone is necessary to become stronger. She tries to pick up a model gun from a drawer, but her hands begin to shake. Screaming, she sees flashes of a bloody face. Her dad died when she was 2. Leaving Tokyo with her mom, everything was fine, until one day they got caught up in the middle of a robbery. The robber shot the clerk after telling him not to move. Clearly unhinged, he points the gun at Shino's mother, threatening to shoot her next. Shino bites the man's hand, grabbing the pistol. He wrestles her for it. She fires once, in the gut. Reaching again, a second, through his right shoulder. Making one last feeble attempt, the third bullet, center forehead. Looking down, screaming as blood pools, everything turns red. She's back in her room, dropping the fake gun. She kisses the great white and places a cloth over the gun, putting it back. Still unable to forget the man's face, wishing someone would come save her. Kirito tells Asuna it'll only take a few days. He'll transfer over to GGO, check it out, and transfer right back. He promised Kikuoka as a favor, which is why he's using his main account. He goes to the hospital, in the off chance Death Gun isn't a rumor, surprised to see the same nurse who took care of him while he was in SAO and rehab. Apparently, Kikuoka spoke with her as well. She tells him to strip, for the electrodes, of course. It's not like she hasn't seen the full works. Kazuto is confident that it'll only take 4 to 5 hours tops. Shino came to Tokyo thinking it would help her panic attacks, which occur whenever she sees or hears anything resembling a gun. Shinkawa introduced her to GGO. Now she uses it as a type of therapy, thinking that winning the BOB will cure her. In a dark room, staring at their screen with the 2 dead players crossed off, the third, Sinon, unmarked, their next target. Kirito logs on to GGO, garnering a lot of attention. His avatar is more feminine than he expected. Becoming lost immediately, he spots Sinon and asks for directions. Thinking Kirito is a girl, she decides to help. He decides to keep up the act long enough to get his bearings. He just needs to sign up for the BOB and get a weapon. Though she thinks he's crazy for entering the tournament after logging on for the first time. Kirito only has 1,000 credits, which will barely get him anything, especially a live ammo gun for PvP. If he wants to make quick cash, there's a gun range with an automated gunslinger. Making it to the end wins you the whole pot, but as soon as you get close, the bullet lines, trajectory markers every player can see, except for the first shot of a sniper, become almost impossible to see. They watch someone attempt it, though they can't get past the quick draw line. Of course, he gets the jackpot in one go, dodging the bullet lines instead of the bullets. Now to find him a good weapon. Kirito sees that there are photon swords. Buying one, despite Sinon telling him they're pretty much useless. At least get a mid-range gun to get in close. She chooses an FN-57 for him. But at the firing range, he can't even hit the target. Leaving the shop, Sinon notices they have 10 minutes to register. They start running, when Kirito notices some 3-wheeled bikes. They're supposed to be extremely hard to control. He just laughs it off, making up an excuse. Just in time, signing up, it asks for Kirito's real-life info. Hesitating, he quickly forgoes entering anything when Sinon surprises him, almost seeing his avatar's displayed gender. Since the game uses credits exchangeable for real currency, it feels like a separate world. Sinon admits to feeling like a different person in GGO than IRL, though quickly changes the subject. When they go to change, he has no choice but to introduce himself formally, which earns him a slap for lying about being a girl. She keeps telling him not to follow her, but he has nowhere to go. She begrudgingly explains the rules. The arenas are randomly generated, and players start at least 500 meters apart. Whoever kills the other player teleports back to the waiting room for their next match. They're in different blocks, So after the prelims, if they both make it, they'll face off in the finals. She shows Kirito her player info after swearing to kill the stronger players. He better win, since now he knows the name of the person who's going to kill him. Spiegel shows up, glad she made it in time, though he only came to watch her matches. He notices Kirito, thinking he's a she. Sinon sets him straight, and Kirito thanks her for their date as the announcement for the prelims sounds. He better be in the finals, angering her further by acting as if it's another date. Spiegel isn't too happy either. In his first match, Kirito isn't prepared for an automatic rifle, getting pinned down until he remembers how the bullet lines work. Kirito masters a lifetime's worth of ninjutsu in mere moments and detects the enemy player moving in the grass. Kirito charges, using his photon sword to deflect the bullets and pierces his opponent's chest before he can reload, winning the match. In the waiting room, Kirito runs into the player calling themselves Death Gun, feeling as if they've met somewhere before, but he can't quite place it. Death Gun asks if he's the real deal, not knowing what he means, asking again while pointing to his name, mentioning his sword skills. Then it hits Kirito. They must be an SAO survivor. But who? Catching a glimpse of their arm, he's completely rattled. It's the Laughing Coffin's emblem. He plays dumb, but Death Gun promises to kill him either way. Kirito has a panic attack, experiencing flashbacks of SAO. They weren't the only murderers. He and the other guilds led a raid on their secret base. It was a bloodbath. In the end, he killed 2 of their members. Kirito, shaking, starts to spiral, realizing that player has the same voice as Death Gun. Sinon tries talking to him. He just grabs her hand, a vacant look in his eyes. Before she can do anything, he teleports to his next match, standing for a moment, solemnly, before losing it and going all out. Sinon can't help but recognize the same thing in herself, becoming flustered while Spiegel watches intently. Sinon lets him get in her head, missing her first shot, but ultimately winning the match. It's their turn to face each other, but he reminds her of herself after seeing the look on his face, distracting her. Spawning on a bridge, Kirito slowly walks towards her. She can't hit him, running up to him, accusing him of not taking it seriously. Is it just a game to him? He promises to give her the fight she wants. They'll duel. He'll throw a bullet in the air, at 10 meters apart. When it hits the ground, it's on. She can't miss at this range. What is he thinking? She agrees, and when the bullet hits the ground, she fires. He cuts the round in half, holding his blade to her neck. She can't believe it. How did he predict where she was aiming? By following her eye through the scope? But that's not a skill. It shouldn't be possible. What is this crazy VR ninjutsu nonsense? Sinon wants to know how to obtain such strength. That's why she's here. But he tells her it's not strength. If she knew the person at the other end would die if she pulled the trigger, could she go through with it? Does he know about her past? No. He avoids eye contact, admitting that he couldn't. Not again. Not after killing 3 people. He doesn't even know their names. She forfeits the match, promising to win in the finals, as Death Gun watches the screen ominously. Sugu points out Kazuto's position on the BOB tournament list. There aren't many players calling themselves Kirito. That and she may have called Asuna. Worried about him, she says he had the same look on his face last night as he did after the SAO incident, telling her it's fine. He'll transfer back after the tournament. There's only 1 day left. Shino, irate, unable to calm down, rants about Kirito to Kyoji. He infuriates her. Who does he think he is? Kyoji tries calming her down. She's not acting like herself. She's never talked about someone this much. She'll destroy him in the finals, taking aim with her index finger, making a finger gun without flinching in her fit of rage. Grabbing her hand, he tries to express his feelings. Going in for a hug, she pushes him away. She isn't ready yet, and asks if he can wait for her. Kirito has nightmares about murdering those players, unable to remember their faces. At the hospital, he asks Aki about remembering those who died under her care. What kind of person does it make him, forgetting the names and faces of the players he killed in SAO? Since it affects him that much, she says it means he cares. He should remember why he did it and the people he saved along the way. In ALO, Asuna spaces out. Reminded of the tournament, she goes to watch it with their friends. Back in GGO, Spiegel tries to comfort Sinon, but she refuses his touch again, saying she needs to focus. Kirito remembers Deathgun's threat. He needs to figure out his avatar's name to thwart his plans. Sinon reluctantly agrees to share info, explaining how the Battle Royale works. Each player starts 1 kilometer away in a multi-terrain arena, with a satellite revealing the player's locations every 15 minutes. The last one standing wins. She tries leaving, but he catches her, wanting to discuss the real reason why he wanted to talk. How many players does she not recognize? A strange question, but easy enough. Jushi X, Pale Rider, and Sturban. Wondering if one of them is Deathgun, Sinon gets mad, demanding to know why. Kirito confesses that one of them might be someone who he fought to the death in another game. She almost opens up, but decides against it, making him promise to stay alive until the end for their duel. Sinon sees Dyne running from Pale Rider on her radar. Deciding to take advantage, she sets up a vantage point as they make their final stand. Pale Rider is extremely dexterous, able to quickly close the distance, killing Dyne at close range, executing him. Suddenly, Pale Rider goes down, but there isn't a player around for miles, except for Kirito sneaking up on her. He avoided detection while underwater. There wasn't a gunshot, but it looks like there's a paralyzing dart in his shoulder. Deathgun appears out of nowhere, slowly walking towards Pale Rider, pulling out a pistol, making a cross with his hand as if in prayer. Kirito frantically tells Sinon to shoot. They can't let him use that gun. In ALO, Kirito's friends watch the bridge battle, becoming nervous when Deathgun appears. Sinon takes aim, but Deathgun dodges, shooting Pale Rider, who disconnects. Deathgun announces himself. Klein drops his drink, recognizing the phrase, "It's showtime," as one of the members of Laughing Coffin's catchphrase. Kirito tells Sinon to stay away from Deathgun. Players have been dying IRL after one shot from his handgun. Refusing to let him go alone, they team up for now. A player shows up, and Kirito blocks his shots while Sinon takes aim, sniping him. They figure Deathgun is using the river to avoid detection. After seeing the events on screen and Klein's comments, Asuna logs out to speak with Kikuoka to find out why he really hired Kirito. Making it to the city, they only see Jushi X on the scan. Thinking it's him and seeing the barrel of Deathgun's rifle, Kirito asks her to watch his back while getting in close. But as soon as he's gone, Sinon becomes paralyzed, a dart in her left shoulder. Deathgun approaches, calling Kirito out. He wants to know if it's really the same swordsman from that day, wanting to see the fury and rage behind his blade. If killing his friend is what it takes, then so be it. Sinon notices the gun he's using, the Type 54 Black Star, the same gun she killed the robber with as a child. It's not the dart that's paralyzing her anymore. Seeing the man's face reflected back at her in Deathgun's empty, glowing red eyes. A shot rings out. It's Kirito throwing a smoke bomb. Picking up Sinon, he looks for an escape route. Spotting some vehicles, they get on a similar bike from before. Sinon notes the horse is faster but harder to handle. Kirito tells her to destroy it while they drive away. She can't pull the trigger. Why now, when she needs it the most? Deathgun mounts the horse and makes chase. He's gaining on them. Kirito yells, "Shoot him!" Making the shot doesn't matter. They need a distraction. But she can't pull the trigger. It's as if her body won't let her, losing the will to fight. If she won't, then he will. No, only Sinon can use Hecate. It's a part of her. They'll do it together then. She takes aim while he helps pull the trigger. Too shaky. Can't get him in her scope. Kirito counts down. She'll have her chance in a moment. The bike goes over a ramp, airborne. She wonders how he's so calm in a moment like this, realizing his strength comes from going all out when he fights. No holds barred, no matter what. They pull the trigger together. It's a miss. Close enough though. The bullet enters a wrecked car, igniting the gas tank, watching it explode while Deathgun is enveloped in flames. They escape into the desert, though too exposed. Sinon notices a cave nearby, They can avoid the next satellite scan there. Sinon confirms that there's a cloaking skill. That's how he appears out of nowhere. But the sand makes it almost impossible to avoid detection. They'll see footprints, or at least hear his steps. Wondering whether Deathgun made it out alive, Kirito is certain he did, having seen him jump off the horse at the last second. But how did he know it wasn't Jushi X and get to her so fast? Jushi X was a woman, and he could see Sinon lying on the ground, so he picked up her gear and started shooting and throwing grenades. He tries consoling her, deciding to go after Deathgun alone. Isn't he scared? Of course he is. Who isn't afraid to die? But he can't just sit back waiting for the tournament to end, putting other players at risk. Sinon's no good at close quarters though. She doesn't care if she dies. She's weaker than she was back then. She'd rather be dead. He refuses to let her die alone. There's no such thing. It burns a hole in the memories of those you know. No one can die alone. A piece of everyone you know dies with you. If that's the case, then he can protect her for the rest of her life. He doesn't understand. Is he going to hold blood-soaked hands? Crying and beating on his chest, yelling she hates him. She reveals what she did as a child. When Deathgun was chasing them, she wasn't Sinon. She was that scared little kid. He understands all too well. He's a survivor of SAO, and so is Deathgun. He managed to block it out until he came face to face with him before the tournament. How did he get over it? He admits that he still has nightmares. Seeing their faces, hearing their last words, the only thing you can do is accept it. But right now, there's someone trying to murder them. How does he pull it off though? You can't stop someone's heart by shooting them in-game. Wait a second. Deathgun switched to his rifle when shooting Kirito. So there are rules, or a system he follows. If he saw the players input their real data while signing up for the tournament, he would know where they live. But he can't be in two places at once. There's an accomplice in the real world. Putting on an act in front of an audience gives him the opportunity to check the time and coordinate with his partner. The victims lived alone, with shoddy locks. Being unconscious, they wouldn't even know. Sinon begins to panic. Her heart rate increases rapidly. She needs to calm down or she'll automatically log out, waking up to someone waiting to kill her. Meanwhile, in ALO, Kikuoka shows up. They demand to know what's happening. Before explaining, Yui lays out all the information about the GGO incidents. It's too late to do anything now. All they can do is watch. Asuna won't accept that, getting Kazuto's location out of him. Kirito calms Sinon down. If there really is someone in her apartment, they need to come up with a plan. They can't kill her if she avoids getting shot, so he'll act as bait. She will lie in wait. They notice the live stream camera above, hoping nobody hears them. The scan shows 24 players dead, showing 2 players on the map. Accounting for the deaths he's aware of, there's 1 missing. There might be more than 1 person IRL carrying out the killings. Sinon plans to take out Yamakaze, so Deathgun can't. But he's too fast. She has to wait until he slows down to shoot. Kirito uses his crazy ninjutsu nonsense from the first round, realizing that focusing on their intent to kill gives him superpowers, apparently. A shot rings out. He barely dodges Deathgun's bullet. Yamakaze notices, taking cover. Perfect. Sinon has a stationary target, taking him out. Now that they know the other's location, Deathgun and Sinon have each other in their sights, firing simultaneously. The bullets rip through both of their scopes. It's up to Kirito now. Making a mad dash towards Deathgun, who unsheathes a blade from the stock of his ruined rifle, stabbing Kirito in the shoulder. Asuna arrives at the hospital. Kazuto's covered in sweat, heart rate spiking. Noticing the player's handle, Sturban, the nurse explains it's a German term used when patients die. Kirito confronts Deathgun, explaining his theory on the killings. But there's something he's missing. If he knew his SAO handle, Deathgun laughs. He'll never remember. Kirito told him not to bother telling him, thinking they'd never meet again. In the hospital, Kazuto isn't looking too hot. Well, actually he's way too hot. He's burning up. There's nothing they can do. Asuna only hopes he feels her hand on his. Kirito remembers. He's blocking it out. There was a briefing before they attacked Laughing Coffin. Red Eyes. His SAO handle, Red-Eyed Saza. Deathgun is taken aback. Enough of a distraction for Sinon to get a bullet line trained on him. No scope, a phantom bullet. Deathgun evades, dodging backwards. He cloaks himself. Kirito can't quite reach him, though he still has a sidearm, drawing his pistol, firing a few rounds to stop him from cloaking. Kirito severs him in half at the waist with his photon sword, winning a duel of the fates. But he warns Kirito that it's not over yet. Then Sinon catches up, figuring out how they should end the tournament, tossing a live grenade to Kirito and hugging him while he juggles it. The first BOB ended with 2 winners in a similar fashion. Shino wakes up to an empty apartment, relief washing over her. Someone rings her doorbell. She freezes until she hears Kyoji's voice. Letting him in, he begins acting strange, saying that she promised she'd be his if he waited. She pushes him off. He takes out a syringe, revealing himself to be Deathgun's partner. He's lost it, overcome by his obsession with Shino. Retreating into her own mind, wishing it was over. But after everything in GGO, she finds the strength to fight back. But he grabs her and Kazuto busts through the door, wrestling him off her. Kyoji gets on top of him, pulling out the syringe. Shino grabs a radio, bashing Kyoji on the back of the head, knocking him out. She notices Kazuto still has an electrode from the hospital on his chest, conveniently where the syringe hit. He's fine. Shino stands up to her bullies for the first time, finally able to hold her own in the presence of a gun. She takes it, schooling her on how to use it, though it's only a BB gun. Kazuto and Shino meet with Kikuoka at a cafe. Apparently, Kyoji's older brother was Zexi from Laughing Coffin. He confessed everything. How they used their father's position at the hospital to gain access to the drugs, and meticulously researched their victims, acting with a second ex-member of Laughing Coffin. It seems like all 3 left the real world behind, unable to distinguish it from their virtual selves. The 3rd member is still at large, and Laughing Coffin isn't done with Kirito. They give Kikuoka a note, telling Kirito to wait until it's showtime. Kazuto brings Shino to A-Gil's bar, where she meets Asuna and Liz from SAO. She becomes uncomfortable when he admits telling them about what she did as a kid, but he pleads with her to stay. There's someone she needs to meet. A mother and daughter walk through the back door and sit down. In tears, the mother tells Shino she was working at the post office the day of the robbery. She was pregnant with her daughter at the time. She apologizes for not thanking her sooner. If she hadn't done something to stop the robber, her daughter wouldn't be there to thank her in person. The little girl hands her a hand-drawn picture, thanking her for saving them. Shino breaks down, and Kazuto tells her she has to forgive herself. There was more than one person that day. She can't forget the life she took, but at least she can remember those she saved. 2 young boys take turns swinging an axe to fulfill their sacred task, an assigned vocation to cut down the gigas cedar, hindering their village's growth. But it's futile, barely making a dent, like the 6 generations that preceded them. The helplessness quickly fades as Alice, their friend, shows up with lunch, greeting both Yujio, the blonde, and a strangely familiar dark-haired boy named Kirito. Their lunch will spoil if they aren't fast enough. If only there was a way to preserve food. Kirito has a brain blast, coming up with an ingenious way to preserve Alice's pie by making it cold, and probably uncomfortably moist using his knowledge of cold salted meat. They just need some ice, which should be no problem in a feudal kingdom lacking the technology to cut down a single tree. They remember a legendary hero who found himself in an ice cave while chasing the dragon guarding the border to the Dark Territories. As long as they don't cross the border, they can avoid breaking the rules detailed in the Taboo Index. Upon reaching the cave, they find enough ice to last the village a lifetime. But something's off. They find the blue rose sword and bones of the ice dragon surrounding a hoard of treasure. There was nothing in the legend about the dragon's death. After gathering as much ice as they can carry, they realize there are multiple paths. Having forgotten which one they came in through, they choose one that leads to the Dark Territory. They hear the sound of battle, and spot an Integrity Knight fighting a knight from the Dark Territory while riding dragons. The Integrity Knight cuts down the Dark Territory Knight, and he drops out of the sky, landing a few meters from the children, reaching out as if asking for help. Alice feels she should and begins to move toward him before the two boys can stop her. She trips, and her finger barely crosses the boundary. Suddenly, a head appears, confirming their fear. Alice has broken the taboo index. The Integrity Knight from the day before visits the village, but this time, the only thing he'll be vanquishing is a child. Kirito tries to create a distraction, but Yu-Gi-Oh is unable to move. A searing pain in his right eye stops him in his tracks. Shortly after, Kirigaya Kazuto wakes up from a full dive. He meets up with Shino at a cafe, where she asks him to help her in the next BOB before Asuna arrives. Worried about his physical condition, Asuna checks an app that monitors his vitals, figuring his new part-time job was to blame. Shino inquires, and Kazuto explains that he's been working for a company called Wrath that's developing a new type of full dive tech. They call it a soul translator, which uses Fluctlights, basically the equivalent of a soul instead of the user's brain, effectively coding short-term memories onto the Fluctlight to create a more realistic sensory experience. Due to the nature of the project, Kazuto doesn't retain any memories from the virtual world codenamed Underworld. While walking home with Asuna, Kazuto floats the idea of going to America to research the next generation of full dive tech, only if she would join him, of course. The Soul Transfer project feels like an extension of Kayaba's work, and he would rather distance himself from similar endeavors. They're interrupted by a man who begins to ask for directions, when Kazuto confronts him about following them ever since they left the cafe. Dropping the act, the man reveals that he's a former member of Laughing Coffin and lunges toward Kazuto with a syringe, the same one that Death Gun used on his victims. It's showtime. Kazuto pushes Asuna to safety and tries to fend off their assailant. In the melee, he's injected with the toxin as his umbrella pierces the attacker's leg. But it's too late. Kazuto collapses from cardiac arrest. Kirito wakes up in the middle of a forest with no recollection of how he got there. Judging by the scenery and his clothing, he figures he must be back at the underworld, but he shouldn't have any memory of the real world if that's the case. He stumbles across Yu-Gi-Oh, though he has no memory of him and can't tell if he's an NPC or not. He doesn't recognize any terms relating to video games, so gaining information isn't fruitful. He decides to wait until Yu-Gi-Oh finishes his sacred task for the day. He discovers that the game menu is still accessible. Yu-Gi-Oh details the incident with Alice, though in his telling, Kirito wasn't there. After explaining his calling, Yu-Gi-Oh was surprised when Kirito asks to help. Despite his sword skills and experience, the tree is just as resilient as always. Upon completion of Yu-Gi-Oh's daily duty, they head to the village. The boy guarding the gate stops them. He begins to make fun of Yu-Gi-Oh's calling and assumes Kirito can't remember his, as a lost child of Vecta, though he's quickly put in his place after Kirito claims to be a swordsman, using his sword to slice through a tree stump. Yu-Gi-Oh brings Kirito to the church, where he meets Selka. While falling asleep, he deduces Wrath must have taken the Fluctlights of babies. With the in-game acceleration of time, generations of artificial reproduction would culminate in realistic people, especially since Yu-Gi-Oh claims it's been 6 years since Alice disappeared, which only happened yesterday, IRL time. The next day, the two boys head to the Gigas tree. Kirito wonders about Selka, who, as it turns out, is Alice's younger sister. After Alice was taken, she took over at the church, learning the sacred arts, system commands perceived as magic. Since the axe is practically useless, Kirito asks if there's anything more powerful. A little while later, Yu-Gi-Oh returns with the blue rose sword he retrieved 3 years after the incident. Kirito tries to use it on the tree, but isn't able to do much, but it still beats the axe. If they can raise their object control authority, they should be able to handle the sword properly. That night, Kirito asks Selka about her sister's disappearance. Apparently, Yu-Gi-Oh hasn't been the same since. Before leaving, Selka asks why her sister was taken, since no one will tell her. When he wakes up, Selka is nowhere to be found. Yu-Gi-Oh immediately deduces she must have gone to the cave where Alice broke the taboo index. The two hurry after her. They hear screams from inside the cave and discover she's been abducted by goblins. Yu-Gi-Oh freezes up, unable to move as the goblins close in. Kirito calms him down and devises a plan to rescue Selka. Arming them with swords, he begins cutting the goblins down. While Yu-Gi-Oh watches Kirito fight the goblin leader, he still hesitates to act. Just when it looks like Kirito is about to lose, he finally jumps into action. He distracts the leader long enough for Kirito to recover, though he receives a grievous injury. Kirito enters into a rage and takes out the goblin leader, scaring off the rest. He unties Selka, but when she sees Yu-Gi-Oh's state, she isn't sure if her sacred arts can save him. Instead, Kirito decides to transfer his own life energy to save Yu-Gi-Oh. Almost passing out, he hears a voice telling him to come save her, and Kirito gets a strange feeling that they've met before. He asks Yu-Gi-Oh about it the next day. After the battle, Kirito's skills are high enough to swing the blue rose sword. Yu-Gi-Oh wants nothing more than to save Alice and asks him to train him. After some time, their sword skills are high enough to fall the tree as Yu-Gi-Oh lands the final blow. Since Yu-Gi-Oh has successfully completed his calling, he gets the chance to choose a new one. He vows to become a swordsman like Kirito and travel to the capital to save Alice. After saying goodbye to Selka, the two leave town for the first time in their lives. In the real world, following the attack on Kazuto's life, Asuna and his family are told that he may have permanent brain damage and is in a coma. Kikuoka proposes that the only way they could treat him is in a special facility, though his sister and Asuna are unable to locate him afterwards. They discuss the situation with all their friends and conclude that they must be using the new soul translator tech. Tracking his heart monitor, Asuna gets a ride from Klein to the last location, but it's a dead end. There's a helipad, and now that he's out of range, he could be anywhere. Their best bet is looking into Wrath. Apparently, Rinko Kojiro, Kayaba's assistant, helped develop the technology and might know where Wrath is holding Kazuto. After receiving an email, she decides it's time to pay a visit to their secret base in the middle of the ocean, bringing her assistant with her. Kikuoka is surprised to see her, as Rinko has been ignoring him up until now, but he's glad she came. Apparently, she's one of 3 people required to pull the project off. Having met the second, Takeru, the lead developer, Kikuoka says the 3rd member isn't available at the moment. Asuna then reveals her identity, removing her disguise as Rinko's assistant, and demands to see Kazuto. Since none of the other victims survived the toxic injections, Kikuoka assures her that using the STL is the only way to treat Kazuto's brain damage. They already know that the soul transfer tech can contain souls in what they call fluctlights. But to what end? Well, the real goal of the project is to create a bottom-up AI. Copying adults always leads to instability and collapse. They used the souls of babies, so the AI would grow up and learn. Using the seed, they created the underworld to simulate an entire civilization, using the newborn fluctlights as archetypes, raised by 4 Wrath employees. After they accelerated time in the simulation, society began to form, followed by a governing body who created the Taboo Index, which is followed religiously by the populace, so much so that they are incapable of going against it. That's when they introduced Kirito to the world. Having him grow up with artificial fluctlights caused one, Alice, to break the Taboo Index. They needed someone with years of experience living in VR worlds, so naturally they decided to use Kirito to investigate how these laws came about and why it's nearly impossible for the artificial fluctlights to break them. Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh spend the next 2 years in the underworld honing their sword skills. They successfully enroll in the Sword Mastery Academy, an integral part of becoming an Integrity Knight. Once they achieve that status, it allows them entry into the Central Cathedral and a chance to save Alice. In the underworld, there are only 3 stats: Life, Object Control Authority, and System Control Authority. They work like in most other games. But there's a twist. The strength of one's mental image and the confidence in their abilities grants power beyond mere numbers. A few days later, Kirito spars with his mentor, Lina. She calls him out on holding back the true potential of his sword style. She chose to train him because she also uses an unconventional style. Over the past few years, her confidence in herself has grown. As the second sword seed, she's never been able to beat the first sword seed, Li Vantain, but she may have what it takes now that she doesn't regard her own style as inferior. He promises to show her the true nature of his sword style as a graduation present the next day. Yu-Gi-Oh and Kirito visit an artisan they contracted to craft a sword cut from the tip of the Gigaseeder's trunk, where most of its energy was concentrated. The smith can barely lift the sword, let alone wield it, so he offers it free of charge if Kirito can. Not only can he unsheath it, he even takes a swing. Impressed, the smith honors his word. Despite the rules against practicing on a day of rest, Kirito decides to try out more advanced sword skills he hasn't been able to use thus far. During a 5-strike combo, he's thrown off balance and flings mud onto the uniform of the first sword seed. Li Vantain looks the other way regarding practicing on a day of rest, but not for soiling his uniform. He challenges Kirito to a duel using real swords. Requiring consent from both parties, Li Vantain proposes a first strike match, as opposed to stopping short, whereby the swordsman doesn't follow through. Despite his master's warnings, Kirito accepts the terms, as he's the one being punished. Lina informs him of the Li Vantain family motto. They believe that drawing the blood of their enemy allows them to absorb their strength. This isn't his first battle fought with real swords. Kirito sees this in action when they begin their duel. It becomes clear that his power doesn't come from his stats alone. Li Vantain draws on the power he believes courses through his family's veins, enveloping him in illusory flames, allowing him to use sword skills. He immediately lunges toward Kirito, who has a few tricks of his own, blocking the strike and locking blades. Kirito refuses to lose, like always, and uses the power of friendship and teenage angst to increase his own, using Li Vantain's technique against him. His sword glows, infused with golden light. His resolve causes the blade to grow and turn blue with the power of the demon tree behind him. He attacks the first seed. Their duel is stopped short before either opponent causes serious damage. Kirito goes to check on the flowers he's been growing as a gift for his master, running into the 2 nobles who've hounded him and Yu-Gi-Oh since they started at the academy. He finds his planter ravaged and begins to break down, until he hears the same mysterious voice from the cave. He learns that simply knowing system commands isn't the only way to change the world around him. Using his imagination and tapping into the life force of the flowers, he's able to resurrect them, discovering that the technique used in battle isn't reserved for destruction. Kirito's master realizes that believing her unique style was inferior was the reason she could never beat Li Vantain. But after watching her page's duel, she's confident she can beat the first seed, regardless of technique. During the final examination, she finally wins against the first seed, snapping his practice sword in half. She graduates as the top swordsman in her year. Yu-Gi-Oh and Kirito are promoted, now having their own pages to train. They're not the only ones. The nobles that have been bullying them have been promoted too. Kirito explains how to use one's imagination or will to effectively alter themselves or parts of the world. While attempting to unlock this ability, the 2 nobles, now first and second seed, focus their attention on Yu-Gi-Oh after witnessing Kirito give his master the flowers they destroyed. Humbert, the second seed, antagonizes Yu-Gi-Oh. He loses to Yu-Gi-Oh in a duel, despite Rios ending it short and calling it a draw. A few days later, Yu-Gi-Oh wonders why they haven't retaliated. Kirito reasons they would be breaking the rules if they attacked fellow students, though he worries they may be looking for a loophole in the taboo index. The next day, they have a picnic with their pages, learning that there are ranks within the noble class as well. The lower-ranking ones are aristocrats in name only. Their pages relay the terrible treatment of their friend, a fellow page, following Yu-Gi-Oh's duel with Humbert. Kirito explains that even if something doesn't go against the taboo index, it doesn't make it right. There are things that no one should ever subject a fellow human to, regardless of loopholes in the law. Later, the 2 confront the nobles about the treatment of their pages, but get nowhere. as the nobles play dumb and claim that they aren't technically breaking the rules. Afterwards, Kirito expresses his suspicions that the matter isn't over. They must be planning something. Yu-Gi-Oh's page, Tise, confesses that she is terrified at the possibility of marrying a noble who abuses their position of power. Soon after, Yu-Gi-Oh and Kirito's pages are late for the first time. Fearing the worst, Kirito slips out the window to investigate when Umber's page, Franika, knocks on the door. Apparently, after refusing to go along with his abusive and perverse orders, the two pages went to confront the sadistic nobleman. Yu-Gi-Oh races to their room to find both his and Kirito's pages tied up on the not-so-nobleman's bed. They claim that it's within their right to punish them however they deem fit. Yu-Gi-Oh is stopped in his tracks after being given an order, unable to move. His right eye starts flickering red, sending a sharp pain throughout his whole body, just like the day he tried to stop the Integrity Knight from taking Alice. Yu-Gi-Oh refuses to allow such scum to violate the innocent. His right eye bursts, breaking the seal, and he severs Umber's arm. Rios uses this as an excuse to kill Yu-Gi-Oh now that he's broken the taboo index. Suddenly, Kirito bursts through the window, saving Yu-Gi-Oh. Quickly ascertaining the situation, Kirito takes up arms against Rios. The two clash. Despite Rios' strength, he just can't keep his hands to himself, and without them, retaining blood becomes quite difficult. Rios writhes on the floor like a madman, his body glitching as if the system can't handle what's transpired. Even though they saved their pages, their crimes can't be unwritten. A mysterious face appears, citing the violation, as it did when Alice crossed into the dark territory. The next morning, an instructor heals Yu-Gi-Oh's eye before escorting them to the Integrity Knight waiting to whisk them away to their execution. The boys are shocked as the knight introduces herself as none other than Alice. She strikes Yu-Gi-Oh when he approaches, not recognizing her childhood friend. Their pages come to see them off, returning their swords and thanking them one last time as they're flown to the central cathedral, chained to a dragon. At the facility, Asuna runs into a robot after visiting Kazuto. It turns out that they're trying to create a physical vessel to hold a Fluctlight, making it easier for the AI to pilot and look more human. Back in the underworld, Yu-Gi-Oh and Kirito discuss Alice's new condition and whether the voice in the cave was really Alice. They figure out that since they can still inspect the durability of items, and since their chains have the same object authority, theoretically, they should be able to break each other's. Hypothesis confirmed. It's time for a jailbreak. They find themselves outside on a garden terrace filled with roses. Now that they know Integrity Knights don't retain their memories, their goal changes. They have to rescue Alice and find a way to return her memories. Just when they think they're in the clear, they run into an Integrity Knight. Apparently, he's been waiting for them. It turns out he's Alice's disciple. Their chains won't help them now. The knight reveals his divine weapon, playing his hand too early. The two escapees devise a plan, but it's no use. Something's off. Yu-Gi-Oh recognizes the knight's name. As soon as they remind him of his past, an object protrudes from his forehead, most likely whatever's messing with his memories. But before they can learn anything more, another Integrity Knight fires an arrow into Kirito's foot. The two prisoners decide to book it. Kirito hears a voice directing them to a door that appears out of nowhere. A giant library lies on the other side, the door disappearing behind them. A woman greets them, introducing herself as Cardinal. Getting Kirito alone, she explains that she knows about the outside world and the truth behind the Axiom Church. He comes to realize she's an incarnation of the Cardinal system that he's already familiar with. She explains that the church's founder is a descendant of the one Wrath employee with more devious intentions than the other three. Queenella discovered the underlying system that formed the basis for the sacred arts. With this knowledge, she began to increase her system control authority until she had enough power and followers to start the Axiom Church. By creating the Taboo Index, she guaranteed no one could surpass her control authority. Nearing the end of her life, Queenella finally accessed the complete list of system commands, effectively making herself immortal. The Cardinal system was a threat to her power. Trying to gain the same authority level, she accidentally fused her Fluctlight with the system itself. After a time, Quinella realized that her Fluctlight memory capacity had reached its limit. She needed to devise a plan to overcome such limitations. She summoned a child, attempting to override her memories and supplant her own. Turns out it was her biggest mistake. She didn't account for potentially creating another godlike entity. The cardinal system contains a sub-process that acts as error correction. When Quinella tried taking control of the girl's Fluctlight, the sub-process became contained within the woman calling herself Cardinal. After escaping to the Great Library, Quinella began to use the synthesis ritual to create Integrity Knights, while Cardinal sent out spies to gain allies of her own for the past 200 years. Despite this tyrannical rule over the underworld, Wrath never stepped in. Instead, they're using it as a test. The Dark Territories are set to invade the human realm, harboring Fluctlights of their own. Cardinal deemed it necessary to eliminate Quinella, the administrator, along with the Dark Territories, and the human ones. Despite that, she promises to save about 10 Fluctlights. Kirito agrees to help her, but he refuses to delete the entire world. He'll find a way to save as many people as possible. Cardinal explains that the prism protruding from the Integrity Knight is the key to saving Alice. They just need to secure the memories the administrator has locked away. Before they set off, she gives them 2 daggers, allowing her to cast any sacred art on whoever's flesh they pierce. They already have weapons that rival the Integrity Knights, though they still need the ability to perform perfect weapon arts by unlocking the memories and power infused into the weapon itself. With that, they set off to reach the top of the cathedral to take down the administrator and rescue Alice from her clutches. Kirito and Eugeo make their way into the cathedral. Locating their swords is the first thing on their minds. They stumble across an armory filled to the brim. The church has been hoarding weapons and armor as if preparing for war. Luckily, that includes the boys' swords. Kirito, however, believes it's just another form of oppression out of fear of revolt. Upon finding the staircase leading to the top, they are met by an Integrity Knight's torrent of arrows. The duo barely evades the attack and plans their next move. Seeing how his bowstring has broken and his arrows are spent, it should be a piece of cake. That is, until he fires up his bow using its perfect weapon art. The knight accuses the two of corrupting Sir Eldrier's mind with dark arts. Protesting, they explain how they were trying to remind him of his life before becoming an Integrity Knight. But the bowman dismisses the idea. They have no past lives. They descend from the heavens themselves. Kirito tells Eugeo to close in after he blocks the first shot. Despite his best efforts, the arrow smashes through his sacred arts, sending him flying when he tries to use his sword as a last-ditch effort. Now's his chance. Eugeo rushes up the stairs and leaps at the Integrity Knight. Thinking about Alice allows him to unlock the Blue Rose Sword's power. A clash of ice and fire leaves the knight frozen in defeat. The knight marvels at their sword skills, surprised to learn of their unique Aincrad abilities, and is ultimately pleased to know that there are new styles to discover. The knight retracts his accusations and, out of respect, asks for their names. He warns the duo of a deadly ambush on the cathedral's 50th floor before requesting an honorable death by their sword and introducing himself as Deus Albert. Eugeo recognizes him as the same Integrity Knight from the day of Alice's arrest, a day only he remembers. The administrator routinely wipes the knight's memories. Sparing him, the duo continues up the stairs until the sound of laughter stops them. 2 young girls block their path. Introducing themselves as Fiesel and Lenal, they descend the stairs towards them. Kirito backs off to let Eugeo take the lead, only leading him right into their trap and dagger. Before Kirito can act, Lenal flanks and shanks. Both boys end up paralyzed by the poison blades. Dragging their limp bodies up the stairs, the girls recount their brutal childhood. It turns out they're apprentice Integrity Knights who were forced to kill each other countless times as subjects in resurrection experiments. Kirito had recognized the girls' dagger scabbards as specific to sheathing poison blades and took precautions against the toxins. The effects were wearing off. When they reach the 50th floor and his captors are distracted by the ambush of knights awaiting them, Kirito launches his belated counterattack, disarming them and using their own poison against them. Telling Yujiro to use his sacred arts as soon as his voice returns, Kirito engages the Integrity Knight, Funatio. Unable to close the distance, Kirito's stomach and foot are pierced by the knight's perfect weapon art. Apparently, the blade was formed using 1,000 mirrors, allowing it to reflect the sun's energy. After receiving this very crucial information, Kirito uses sacred arts to conjure a mirror, rendering the attack useless. Destroying Funatio's helmet reveals her attempt to conceal her gender to curb the bias of her opponents, despite the fact that women are the most powerful beings in Underworld. She releases her weapon art, but also hurts herself in the process. Kirito quickly tackles her in a bid to save her from herself, while Yujiro uses his perfect weapon art to freeze Funatio in place. But it isn't enough to stop her completely. To combat her desperate attempt to stop the duo, Kirito uses his perfect weapon art, rendering them both unconscious after a giant stream of black tendrils reminiscent of the Gigas Eater from which it was forged shoots out of the end of his blade. Yujiro tries to transfer his life energy into Kirito, but Kirito stops him short, telling Yujiro that Funatio needs their help more than he does. They're all humans after all, even the two kids who were planning to execute them. Kirito tries to use healing arts on Funatio. It's not enough. He calls out to her allies, to no avail. In a desperate bid to save her life, Kirito uses one of the blades meant for the administrator. The Cardinal chastises them, but gives them potions to heal themselves. If they can make it before she awakens, then they may still be able to defeat the administrator without using the Cardinal's blade. The two boys open the massive double doors to continue their ascent, only to find a massive elevator. They're surprised when they find a woman there who asks which floor, especially after revealing that they're fugitives. But she doesn't seem to care. This is her only job. She's just simply called the operator. And having spent the last 107 years doing this job, she knows of nothing outside of the shaft. They reach the 80th floor, only to discover an exquisite garden that neither of them expected to find. Yujiro notices Alice and is having a difficult time holding back. Kirito tells him that he'll take care of the fighting while Yujiro waits in the wings with the Cardinal's second blade. But when he charges towards her, she reveals that she's already using her perfect weapon art, the Osmanthus blade. The two clash, and Alice is surprised that Kirito is the second person able to withstand her attacks for more than a few seconds. While she's distracted, Yujiro freezes her, but it's not enough to give them an opening. As soon as she uses her blade to thaw herself, Kirito uses his perfect weapon art, only to cause an explosion, leaving Yujiro alone while the cathedral's walls immediately repair themselves with Alice and Kirito trapped outside. Kirito ends up saving them both by lodging his sword in the side of the giant building. Alice demands he let go of her and allow her to fall to her death, provoking him to chew her out for being so stubborn. He tries to explain how the Axiom Church and the Taboo Index are flawed and the Pontifex is a liar. Kirito's sword comes loose, only for Alice to surprise him by saving his life. They decide to make a truce and climb the tower until they reach an opening. Connected by a chain, they use metal spikes to slowly scale the cathedral. Back at the research facility, Asuna and Dr. Kojiro notice a ship on the horizon, but instead of staying around to protect them, it changes routes, provoking Mr. Nakanishi to make some frantic inquiries. As the sun sets in the underworld, Kirito is having trouble creating more spikes, and as they continue, they suddenly come face to face with gargoyle-esque statues that spring to life. Kirito has to think fast. He launches Alice up onto a ledge. She angrily returns the favor. She explains that they are familiars from the Dark Territories called minions, conjured from clumps of soil. She wants to know the reason for their presence just as much as he does. They make quick work of them. Seeing him fight reminds Alice of her past life, attending the Midsummer Festival, which confuses her. Had she been, or had she just heard about it? She quickly changes the subject, offering a handkerchief to wipe off minion blood, making sure to ask for it back before they continue their duel. Meanwhile, inside, Yujiro enters a giant bathhouse to find an Integrity Knight lounging, who asks him to wait until he gets dressed before they continue. The knight asks whether Frenatio is still alive, and then promises to spare Yu-Gi-Oh since they spared her life. The two square up, and the knight warns him that he has no chance. He's going to use his best move first. Yu-Gi-Oh doesn't stand a chance. The knight's using a blade made out of the system clock, the time-splitting sword, which allows him to strike the future? The Integrity Knight, however, doesn't see his next attack coming. Yu-Gi-Oh throws the blue rose sword into the ceiling while attacking, throwing the knight off guard, and Yu-Gi-Oh tackles him into the water. Using his weapon art to freeze the water with him in it, Yu-Gi-Oh uses Release, which absorbs all the life force of those frozen in its weapon art, banking that his life force is higher than the knight's. Yu-Gi-Oh becomes enraged after the knight recalls killing the dragon in the cave, barely remembering the blue rose sword. He's his hometown's founder and legendary warrior, Berkoli. The Integrity Knight admits to doubting the story of being summoned from heaven. But before any more revelations, the Prime Senator, Chudelkin, rolls in and completely freezes Berkoli and Yu-Gi-Oh. Kirito's spidey senses tingle as he mutters Yu-Gi-Oh's name, still outside on the ledge with Alice. They share a meal, and Kirito lets slip Alice's younger sister's name. Apprehensive, she allows him to continue, promising to end him if she detects him lying. Kirito explains the secret behind Integrity Knights and relays Alice's life before she became one. He goes on to say that the Integrity Knights aren't nearly enough to stop the Dark Territory's armies. They need to defeat the Administrator and train the people to take up arms against their enemies. Alice believes him and asks him to take her to the village before restoring her memories. She stands up and declares that she's renounced her role as an Integrity Knight, only to scream in pain. Her right eye turns red, but she refuses to give in. Kirito holds her as she denounces the Administrator and her tyranny, destroying her eye. Yu-Gi-Oh wakes up, realizing he's been dreaming. He comes to in a strange place, unsure of how he got there. On a bed, there's a sleeping woman. The Cardinal tries to warn him, screaming for him to run, and the Administrator wakes up before he can use the dagger on her. She convinces him that no one truly loves him, not even Alice, and tricks him into reciting the sacred art that she uses on Integrity Knights. Alice wakes up to find Kirito out of breath and covered in sweat. Apparently, he carried her up to the 95th floor, finally inside the cathedral again. She recoils. How dare he foul her clothing with his sweaty body? To find Yu-Gi-Oh, Kirito uses a sacred art to track the blue rose sword. Alice sees Berkoli, horrified to find him completely frozen, and recognizes the work of the Prime Senator. He thaws just enough to speak and commends her on being strong enough to break the seal in her eye. Kirito finds the blue rose sword under a layer of ice. Alice comments on wielding two swords, to which Kirito replies that fighting with two swords would be crazy. They continue to make their way to the top of the cathedral, only to find a room filled with people trapped in pods, or at least they used to be people. The Pontifex has them trapped, constantly working to monitor the citizens' behavior, finding those who break the taboo index and sending knights to apprehend them. In the next room, they hear Prime Senator Chudelkin freaking out. Alice confronts him about the truth of the Pontifex and Integrity Knights. The creepy little lout starts singing like a canary. It turns out she was forced into synthesis. Alice stabs him. He laughs. They've fallen into his trap. They run after him, entering a room with a small hole in the ceiling, but he's nowhere to be found. An Integrity Knight, no, wait, Yu-Gi-Oh, thanks them for returning his sword. He's unable or refuses to remember either Kirito or Alice, and the two square up. Kirito tries to remind Yu-Gi-Oh of who he is while they clash, but despite remembering the names of his moves, he doesn't remember who taught him. Kirito pours his heart into his sword, and using the memories of friendship and angst-ridden screams, he notices the module placed in Yu-Gi-Oh's forehead. For a second, it seems as though he remembers Alice, but uses his perfect weapon art to freeze them in place, much to the Prime Senator's dismay, who goes to finish them off. The Administrator congratulates Yu-Gi-Oh on his success and promises his reward after resynthesizing him. But as she does, he remembers Kirito from his childhood and refuses to chant the synthesis ritual. Taking out the cardinal's dagger, he tries to stab the Pontifex, but no blade of metal is able to pierce her skin. She gives him one last chance to commit himself to her and destroy the dagger. But Yu-Gi-Oh comes to his senses and realizes what true love and friendship are. She decides to force synthesis, but Yu-Gi-Oh refuses to give up. Suddenly, the Prime Senator bursts through the floor, followed by Kirito and Alice. They all stop to have a convenient tearful reunion, while the less than scantily clad administrator looks on. Alice speaks out against her tyrannical reign. The administrator reveals that it was she who installed Code 871 to keep her subjects in line. With a newfound vigor, the Prime Senator conjures a giant flame monster he calls Genie, after the administrator promises him a night of rewards for his effort. Alice uses her weapon art to distract the flame genie, while Kirito powers up a shot directed at the senator himself, easily ripping through his unguarded, gross little form. Pretty anticlimactic. But this tips off the administrator to the fact that Kirito is really a human and not a real citizen of the underworld. The administrator activates her trump card, a giant golem made out of divine object-level swords, which she calls the Sword Golem. It instantly skewers Alice and throws Kirito against a wall, all but crushing him. Suddenly, Cardinal speaks through the spider she planted on Kirito's clothing. It grows into a giant and distracts the golem long enough for Yu-Gi-Oh to use the dagger to stab the levitating disc, which conjures a door for the Cardinal to step through. She immediately heals Alice and Kirito. As if nothing happened, Kirito quickly explains who she is to Alice, as Cardinal laments the death of Charlotte, the spider with a very unique and original name. The administrator reveals that she's been stalling to trap Cardinal in the room with her. She also reveals that the golem's power source is converted humans by way of the piety module. She used the memories stolen from the Integrity Knights to distill their desire into each sword, which in turn makes them human, and the Cardinal is powerless to kill humans. She offers her own life in exchange for Alice's, Yu-Gi-Oh's, and Kirito's safety. The administrator brutally tortures her, killing her slowly while cackling. They promise to avenge her, when suddenly Yu-Gi-Oh discovers his purpose and asks Cardinal to transform him into a sword. Before his transformation is complete, he reveals that metal objects don't work on the Pontifex. Yu-Gi-Oh, the sword, makes quick work of the golem, sets his sights on the administrator, and sacrifices himself to sever the Pontifex arm. The sword wasn't made of metal. Just as she turns her own severed arm into a sword to strike Kirito down, Alice jumps between them. Kirito has flashbacks to every other time this has happened, but instead of sitting there helpless, he finally takes up arms. Kirito dons his black swordsman attire and faces off against the Pontifex alone. He's surprised to find that she knows about his multi-strike combos. In fact, there's nothing about the system she doesn't know. Yu-Gi-Oh takes Kirito's hand and pours his remaining energy into a blood-infused blue rose sword. Taking up both swords, he stands against the administrator, who only becomes more enraged with every strike. In an act of angsty friendship, Kirito sacrifices his arm, taking hers in the process, and uses the other to stab her with the blood blade, causing irreparable damage. Instead of attempting to finish him off, she slinks away, promising to meet again next time in his world. But the Prime Senator is somehow still alive, enough to beg her not to leave. He latches onto her, engulfing them in flames, killing them both. Yu-Gi-Oh says a tearful goodbye while Kirito holds him in his arms. Yu-Gi-Oh is reunited with his memory of Alice as a kid. Kirito approaches the system console and hears gunfire in the real world. The ocean turtle is under siege, and Kikuoka tells him to find Alice and take her to the World's End altar within the Dark Territories. Suddenly, his Fluct Light takes damage as the power is cut by the attackers. As he loses consciousness, Asuna descends from the ceiling, reaching out and calling to him. Months pass since Kirito's defeat of the administrator. Due to a power surge combined with Yu-Gi-Oh's death, The bond of friendship is broken, and so too is Kirito, now a husk of his former self. Alice takes him to their childhood village, though she's still branded a criminal, so the mayor, her father, turns them away. Now the two live in a cabin on the outskirts, only interacting with her sister and a group of woodcutters. One day, they ask Alice for help. She uses the power stored in the hard wood of Kirito's Giga-Cedar blade to cut down the inferior trees. All of a sudden, Kirito falls out of his wheelchair, grasping at the Northern Village young woodcutters who had taken Yu-Gi-Oh's sword from him. The remnants of pure friendship caused the catatonic Kirito to move more than he has in weeks. Back at the cabin, a dragon descends from the sky, an Integrity Knight riding on its back. Eldria Synthesis 31 is surprised to find Alice, even more so when he notices Kirito, whom he admonishes for killing the Pontifex and throwing the kingdom into turmoil. He begs Alice to return with him. The inhabitants of the Dark Territory have begun raiding towns and villages, but she feels responsible for Kirito's safety and refuses, prompting Eldria to depart, dissatisfied. That night, Kirito reacts once again. This time, however, Alice notices plumes of smoke in the direction of Ruid. The raids are closer to home than she thought. Alice dons her armor underneath a cloak and makes haste, riding her dragon into the fray, shocking the villagers upon her arrival. She attempts to evacuate them, but her father and others refuse to take orders from a criminal. She has no choice but to reveal her identity as an Integrity Knight. Dumbfounded, the villagers immediately change their tune and book it, leaving Alice to fend off the horde of goblins and orcs. Later, she sets off to find the Integrity Knights that Eldria mentioned. Meanwhile, on the Ocean Turtle, a small team of mercenaries infiltrate the base, only to find the control room empty. Asuna and the Wrath employees hide out in the sub-control room. It's clear the men know about Project Alice. They must gain access to Alice's Fluctlight before the mercs do. Apparently, when the power was cut, at the same time Kirito was accessing the virtual console, his self-destructive thoughts after Yu-Gi-Oh's death were actualized. This somehow deactivated his Fluctlight's ego, apparently. It turns out that the mercenaries are GGO players that Kirito and co. fought before he was spirited away to the underworld. The team's leader was hired off the books by the US government, who learned of Project Alice, and tasked him with recovering Alice's Fluctlight, presumably having a man on the inside. The mercenaries find themselves locked out of the sub-control room and the Fluctlights, so their tech genius figures the only way to extract the AI is by accessing a virtual console from inside the underworld. Using his elite hacker skills, he discovers that each of the Dark Territory's denizens has a Fluctlight of their own, making them virtually identical to those in the human kingdom. He also notices the words "Final Load Test" popping up in the logs, unsure of what it is or whether it'll interfere with their plan. The plan is simple. Do a deep dive into the underworld using admin accounts and extract Alice from the inside. Luckily, all the high-level Dark Territory accounts don't require a password. Meanwhile, Wrath's tech genius has the same uninspired plan. Apparently, if they can mend the bonds of friendship, they can repair the damage to Kirito's Fluctlight from its sheer power. Asuna, being a conduit of interpersonal energy, volunteers to dive into the underworld to save Kirito and Alice. In Tokyo, Sinon is 1 kill away from winning the BOB in GGO, but the player Subtilizer catches up to her, rendering her sniper rifle useless in such close quarters. She's grabbed by the throat, and while the player strangles her, he ominously utters, "Your soul will be so sweet." She wakes with a start from the nightmare, still plagued by her PTSD. It turns out that Subtilizer is the leader of the mercenaries currently diving into the underworld. As a kid, Gabriel Miller just so happened to be unnervingly obsessed with souls, seeming not to have one of his own. He yearned to find out where in the body souls dwell. Gabriel dives as Emperor Vecta, with a member of his team as a Dark Knight. As the Emperor, he declares war on the human empire with overwhelming support. His only request is to capture the Priestess of Light, Alice, alive. However, in private, Shasta, General of the Dark Knights, disparages the Emperor to his subordinate and lover. They were planning to make peace with the human realm. That evening, the woman disguises herself as a concubine and heads to the Emperor's quarters. She produces a knife, though the would-be executioner quickly becomes the executed. With his hands around her neck, Gabriel remembers the first time he relieved someone of their life, pulling an ice pick out of his childhood friend's ear. His soulless eyes watch what he believes to be the girl's soul leaving her forehead and floating towards the sky. His obsession with Alicia bleeds into the underworld as the life leaves the assassin. He becomes giddy, convinced that the light leaving her body is her soul. Finally, after so many years and tests, he's recreated the same feeling. He inhales the strange substance, seeing a vision from the woman's memory as he did with Alicia. Since Alice's Fluctlight is so important, it must taste even sweeter. The next day, Emperor Vecta addresses his subjects, revealing the woman's frozen head in a block of ice as a warning to anyone who would challenge his rule. Shasta, her lover, becomes furious, going naked Super Saiyan. He attacks, only to have his entire being sucked into the empty black hole of the Emperor's soul. Terrified, the army rallies with cries of "Long live the Emperor!" In the human empire, Alice discovers that the Eastern Gate will be destroyed at the last stage as it begins to crumble. Eldrie greets Alice as she arrives at the Eastern Gate encampment, but goes off on her when he notices Kirito. Bercoli shows up, telling him to relax. Suddenly, he stops and attacks Alice. Somehow, the attack never lands. It turns out Kirito has unconscious latent friend no jutsu. That night, Alice becomes confused while dwelling on her feelings for Kirito. When she leans in to kiss the catatonic swordsman, she's interrupted by Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh's old Padawans, Ronnie and Teisei, who become upset at the revelation of Yu-Gi-Oh's death and Kirito's condition. They promise to look after him during the battle. During the war meeting the following morning, the Integrity Knights plan to funnel the Dark Territories forces through the ravine where the Eastern Gate lies. It remains shrouded in darkness throughout the day, so they just have to absorb the energy from the deceased soldiers to render the enemy mages powerless. Usually, nobody would be able to accomplish such a task. The key is Alice, who somehow gained power akin to a god, for reasons. As the Eastern Gate falls with a flourish, both sides prepare for battle. Deus Elbert unleashes a torrent of his flaming arrows as the legions of goblins advance. Elsewhere, Eldrie is bypassed by goblins using smoke bombs, confusing the knight, as he's never seen anything like it. A soldier runs to warn the others of the incoming goblin forces, wondering where Integrity Knight Renly disappeared to. It turns out he turned tail and ran back to the supply corps. The hordes of giants are stopped in their tracks by Fanatio, who exudes a terrifying presence. That is, until their chief begins glitching out, his right eye glowing red as he breaks free from the pack, somehow rendering Fanatio frozen in place. He leaps into the air, but before his blow connects, one of Fanatio's knights blocks the attack, and her bones crack under the weight of the blow. The chief knocked away, Fanatio can move again, and swears vengeance. Wielding a beam extending to the heavens, she cuts the giant in half, ordering her troops to advance. Deus Elbert runs out of arrows, provoking the goblin chief to attack. The knight cuts down many of the chief's subordinates, but is overrun and pinned by two of the goblins. As the chief goes to attack, one of Deus Elbert's men distracts him, giving the Integrity Knight enough time to fire his sword like an arrow, which penetrates the goblin chief's defenses and wipes out his men. Alice hovers above the battlefield, observing the slaughter. She begins to absorb the spatial resources released upon death, creating a giant orb in the sky. The two kids who poisoned Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh in the cathedral, Linel and Fizel, fight their way back to the storage tents to find the catatonic swordsman and Renly the deserter. Before they make it back, Ronnie and Teisei stumble upon the green-haired knight. Suddenly, they see smoke outside of the tent. The mountain goblins have made their way through the ranks. Renly remembers his traumatic days in training, where he accidentally killed his best friend. Noticing Kirito trying to protect the girls, he grows some stones, saves them, and begins to unleash his double-winged blade's perfect weapon control. As he faces off against the Mountain Goblin's chief, his whole demeanor changes, and he makes quick work of him by slicing him in half vertically, which seems like the Integrity Knight's go-to method of dealing with pretty much everything. Linel and Fizel catch up to him, impressed that he actually did something. The Chancellor of the Dark Mages deploys the entirety of their minion forces, but she couldn't account for Bercoli's OP time-splitting sword, which wipes out every single one of them. Enraged, the Chancellor orders her mages to unleash their sacred arts, but they find themselves incapable of casting any magic. Alice has gathered all of the spatial resources in the area. She unleashes an incredibly strong energy beam and wipes out a large chunk of the enemy forces. Alice falls back, and Venatio orders the mages to deplete the spatial energy by healing their troops. Eldrie appears, ashamed of his failure to stop the mountain goblins from bypassing his ranks. Suddenly, the Ogre Chief appears. He reveals the return of Emperor Vecta and his goal to capture someone called the Priestess of Light, who he presumes is Alice, before Alice proceeds to cut him down. She relays the new information to Bercoli. They plan to split their ranks and draw the enemy away from the ravine. In the Dark Territory, Vecta learns that spatial resources are released upon death and tells the Chancellor to kill 3,000 troops to garner enough resources to launch a counterattack. She then orders the Orc Chief to sacrifice a large portion of his men. As Alice and Bercoli approach by air, they're taken by surprise as the enemy casts a sacred art. The Chancellor laughs as she unleashes the enormous power scavenged from the sacrificed orcs. Suddenly, Eldrie flies to the front and draws away the enemy's sacred art attack and tries to counter it with his own, losing his life in the process. It succeeds in pissing Alice off, and she rage raises the mages to the earth, announcing herself as the Priestess of Light. Vecta watches as a grin spreads across his face, his strange soul fetish confounding Alice with Alicia. He orders the Dark Knights and Pugilists to follow the decoys south and capture the Priestess of Light unharmed. The Pugilists catch up first. They only use hand-to-hand combat and refuse to be cut by any sword. Sheta, an Integrity Knight known for her quiet demeanor, volunteers to take them on solo. When one of the Pugilists goes to punch her, she uses her needle-like sword to slice through their fist and up their arm. The knight calmly begins cutting down their forces. Renly and his forces lie in wait, ready to ambush. Unbeknownst to them, Visago, the mercenary, is on a stealth mission at the Supply Corps camp, picking them off one by one. The leader of the Pugilists faces off against Sheta. Both are equally matched in their fighting prowess and love battle. But one of the Pugilists interrupts as the rest of their forces catch up, and the knight escapes with her dragon. At the Supply Corps camp, Visago is met by Ronier and Tize, who try to defend the camp. Suddenly, a glowing figure appears in the sky. The girls recognize her as the goddess Stacia, who creates a giant rift between the armies and opens a pit below Visago. As he falls, something clicks, and he recognizes Asuna. Before diving, Wrath's tech genius warned Asuna that despite her ability to modify the terrain, she should stop if she gets a headache, which she does to avoid overloading her Fluctlight. She admits that she's not Lady Stacia and tells the girls she's looking for Kirito. It just so happens she's run into the people who know exactly where he is. Her voice alone is enough to make the catatonic swordsman try reaching out, tears streaming down his cheeks. When leaving the caravan, she's suddenly attacked by a jealous Alice. Bercoli steps in and refutes her claim that Asuna is a spy or heretic, explaining that she saved them. They decide to hold a meeting with the other knights, where Asuna tries to explain that she's from another world looking for Alice. But Alice isn't too happy with the idea of going to the real world with her. Asuna learns about the inhibitor in the right eye and Code 871. Bercoli connects the dots and figures that Vecta is from the real world. Asuna is shocked to learn that the Dark Territory has high-level accounts. Alice reluctantly agrees to go with her, but not before they defeat the enemy and save the human empire. The next day, the Dark Knights and pugilists are ordered to cross the rift on ropes extending to the other side. On the Ocean Turtle, the mercenary tech genius syncs the underworld's time one-to-one with the real world. He launches a patch and invites American VR MMO players to join a beta test in the underworld to bolster the Dark Territory's defenses. Yui notices this and contacts Sinon and Lifa. They head to the Wrath facility in Tokyo, which contacts the Ocean Turtle and alerts them to the situation. Yui then informs Agil, Klein, and the others, who plan to transfer their player accounts from ALO to the underworld. They're met with backlash when they try to rally other ALO players to join them. But after a passionate speech, everyone's convinced. In the underworld, 20,000 American players descend from the sky in beams of red light as Level 1 Red Knights. Asuna attempts to erect rock walls to block them, but the Integrity Knights volunteer to hold them off. The Red Knights begin attacking everyone in sight, even the Dark Territory forces. The pugilist leader becomes infuriated when he notices Vecta dip out on his dragon. His right eye glows red and he brutally rips it out, only to rocket across the rift with flames shooting out of his feet. Asuna loses her cool and arm before the pugilist leader asks her to bridge the rift so his people can get across and help them fight the Red Knights. Alice tries to break free from the melee so she can attack from the top of a hill, until Vecta swoops in. His dragon snatches her and flies off. Since the Emperor has the Priestess of Light, the pugilist leader reckons they don't have to fight for him anymore and offers to hold off the American players. Sheta offers to join him, while the others follow Vecta. Back on the Ocean Turtle, the mercenary tech genius plans to deploy another 20,000 players to attack them. Vasago intends to join the fight, this time using his own special account. When the new players log on, Asuna and the others are surrounded. When it looks as though all hope is lost, a glowing figure appears in the sky, leveling the enemy forces with a powerful shot of her bow. Sinon apologizes for being late, and a teary-eyed Asuna embraces her. Sinon logs in as Solis, the sun goddess, and reunites with Asuna and Kirito, who remains in a catatonic state but appears to sense her friendship. Asuna requests that Sinon, who can fly, pursue Vecta while she prepares a counterattack against the remaining American players. Lifa also travels to the underworld as Terraria, the earth goddess, and encounters Lil Pillin, the orc chieftain, who is shocked to be regarded as human for the first time. She allows him to take her to the Dark Lord Vecta as a prisoner, but they're confronted by the Dark Mage leader, DIL. She tries to consume Lifa's energy through the most obvious and convenient means, tentacles. But Lil Pillin overcomes Code 871 and comes to Lifa's rescue. Once free, Lifa severs the mage's arms, which has a significant impact on her overall health. Meanwhile, Bercoli Synthesis 1 rides on Dragonback in pursuit of Vecta and uses his sword's ability to ground Vecta's dragon. Despite his efforts, Bercoli is overwhelmed by Vecta's god mode and decides to fight to his death for Alice's sake. The Emperor leeches Bercoli's blade's incarnate abilities and clouds his consciousness, forcing him to lose focus on reality before severing his left arm. At the ruins, the remaining American players launch an attack on Asuna and her team, and Vasago returns to the game in a new avatar, stalking Asuna from afar. Suddenly, Klein appears in the sky as a bright light in his ALO avatar, promptly followed by Agil, Liz, Silica, and hundreds of other players from ALO. They team up to launch a counterattack. At first, the group is overwhelmed, but with the reinforcements, they are able to gain the upper hand. Meanwhile, Higa, Wrath's tech genius, notices activity spikes in Kirito's Fluctlight as a result of his interactions with Asuna and Sinon. To restore Kirito's self-image, Higa devises a plan to use the Fluctlights of his friends. In order to execute the plan, they need to gain access to the main control room, which is currently occupied by the mercenaries. Higa decides to use a robot as a decoy, and through the ducts, gain access to a panel. Initially, he plans to go alone, but a maintenance worker, kind of a random NPC, volunteers to help. Despite being heavily injured, Broccoli attempts to use his time-splitting sword to slice Vecta in the past. However, Vecta catches him off guard. Just when it seems like it's flucked lights out for Broccoli, his ever-loyal, if somewhat disobedient dragon appears and distracts Vecta, giving Broccoli enough time to strike the afterimage of Vecta in the past. The effects of the attack travel back to the future, extinguishing Vecta's flucked light capacitor. Broccoli succumbs to his wounds and dies as Alice wakes up, gutted upon seeing her dead uncle. Before his Force ghost disappears, he asks Venatio to take care of their unborn child. With Vecta dead, Miller asks Critter to convert a character from his personal account so that he can return to the underworld and continue with his plans. Sinon discovers Alice mourning Broccoli's death. Her instinct is to go back and join the fight, but Sinon encourages her to keep moving towards the World's End altar. Alice is unsettled by Sinon's explanation that people from the real world can essentially come back in another body since they don't really die here. Elsewhere, Sheta and Iskan fight the enemy forces, and the cold Psycho realizes she's been looking for the one person she doesn't want to slash. And it just so happens that person is a barely clothed kid who solves everything with his fist. Asuna and her companions are shocked to see Visago leading a massive army of Korean and Chinese players while watching over the battlefield with his Po character. Meanwhile, Miller wakes up and logs back into the game using his Subtleizer character, coming face to face with a horrified Sinon. Back in the real world, Higa is about to hack into the main control room to restore Kirito's flucked light when the random maintenance worker NPC guy that volunteered to help pulls a gun on him. In the underworld, Subtleizer overpowers Sinon with some crazy magic or something, but she is saved by the electrode that saved Kirito, which is a manifestation of pure friendship, unhindered by rules or logic. The ALO players try to convince the Red Knights that they were deceived, but Visago intervenes and rallies them once again with a paper-thin argument. Sheta and Iskan, along with the surviving pugilists, aren't looking too hot, but Lifa and Lil Pillin arrive with the orc forces, of course, just in time to save their skins. Back in the real world, NPC maintenance guy reveals himself as the traitor working with the Americans, admitting that he was also involved in the administrator's sabotage of the Alicization project. He wants Kirito to die in revenge for her death, and yammers on that he used to work with Sugo in his illegal experiments. Kikuoka and Rinku uncover the betrayal and realize that he's the one who inserted Code 871 into the underworld. Asuna and the others surrender to protect the residents of the underworld, and Visago confirms he really is Po. He confesses that he was the one who tipped off the assault team about Laughing Coffin's hideout in SAO, resulting in Asuna, Kirito, and the other frontline players becoming murderers. He then demands that Kirito be brought before him, and finally says it's showtime after decades of foreshadowing and buildup. In the midst of the chaos, Yui observes the SAO server rebooting unexpectedly. As Po is about to kill the catatonic Kirito, Eiji and Yuna arrive to aid him. Eiji challenges Po to avenge his friends from SAO, but he is ultimately defeated and Yuna takes him away. Po recalls his deep-seated resentment towards Japanese people, which stems from his father's abandonment and his mother, who was his father's mistress. His father only came to see him years later to ask him to donate a kidney to save his legitimate son's life, which prompted Po to steal nerve gear and log into SAO to kill Japanese players. Two of the Red players recognize Po as a member of Laughing Coffin and try to persuade the others not to follow him, but their attempts are futile. Po uses his bizarre mind control power to make them start fighting each other. Elsewhere, Lifa's super account possesses unlimited regeneration, which enables her to keep fighting despite taking tons of damage and experiencing excruciating pain. She continues to fend off a swarm of Red players until she's exhausted. She pulls through and makes her way to the World's End altar with the orc forces. Meanwhile, Sinon somehow has Hecate, but her leg gets blown off by Subtilizer and she falls to the ground. Her imagination is able to make her rifle act like the super account's bow and shoot an annihilation ray. It's a hit, and Subtilizer runs away like a back at the ocean turtle. Evil trader maintenance guy's bullet merely grazes Higa. Another Wrath employee checks on him and throws something down the shaft, causing the gunman to lose his footing and plummet to the ground below. With the help of Asuna, Sinon, and Lifa, Higa tries to restore Kirito's Fluctlight, channeling their fremeries? Kirito awakens into what appears to be a dream. Visago threatens to keep killing residents of the underworld until Kirito awakens. Asuna hears words of encouragement from Yuki, gets up, and suddenly sprouts angel wings because, yeah. She then tosses him around like a rag doll. However, Visago's weapon siphons the spatial energy around him to heal himself and take control of the red players, ordering them to attack. Asuna reaches out to Kirito, who's replaying his guilt-ridden memories, losing his friends all over again, watching himself become a murderer. Breaking down, he starts trying to rip out his own heart. Asuna, Sinon, and Lifa's Fluctlights aren't enough to snap him out of it. That is, until a fragment of Yu-Gi-Oh's own Fluctlight appears. Kirito, eyes wet with tears, asks his permission, if he's allowed to move on, to come back. His friends clasp his hand, creating a blinding light of friendship that restores his ego, self-image, Fluctlight thing, whatever. Kirito awakens in the underworld. The smell of roses fills the battlefield, and the lone black swordsman utters, "Enhance armament." Visago and the red players are stopped dead in their tracks by Yu-Gi-Oh's blue rose sword. Kirito and Visago square up and start going at it, locking blades. It seems like Kirito is at a disadvantage, refusing to let go of the broken blue blade. Suddenly, Yu-Gi-Oh's Force Ghost appears. He uses Release Recollection to force the Red Knights to log out. Visago attempts to use the spatial energy left behind, but Yuki's Force Ghost explains that because the now logged out players don't want that to happen, it won't. Then Kirito's old apprentice mentions that his sword was made out of a Gigaseeder, which apparently lets it absorb spatial energy. And it also does a thing, and bam, the blue rose sword is back. The two clash blades, but now Kirito is so full of friendship, it's impossible to beat him. He destroys Visago's blade and blasts a hole straight through his torso. Visago, laughing, says he'll just log back in. Kirito tells him that the only way he'll be logging out is at the hands of a lumberjack and releases the memory of his Gigaseeder blade, turning him into a tree. Meanwhile, Critter gets ready to remove the underworld's limiters, so time will no longer be synced with the real world. Higa establishes a connection with Kirito's mind over an open channel, and Kikuoka warns him that if he doesn't escape with Asuna through the World's End altar, they'll be trapped there for 200 years. Alice arrives at the altar and sends her dragons away, but the dragons, equally as loyal as Broccoli's, confront Miller, who's still logged in and right on their tail. They don't really stand a chance, but before he can finish them off, Kirito and Asuna arrive on the scene. Asuna creates a staircase to the console and takes Alice to safety, while Kirito stays behind to face Miller. Kirito struggles against Miller's elite hacks. Somehow, he's become the most powerful entity in the underworld. Having completely mastered magic, a maniacal Miller rips Kirito's legs off, while the two zip around with wings, because they can fly now. Suddenly, Miller transforms into a giant monster thing, while Kirito debates whether he actually wants to stay in the underworld for selfish reasons. But his memory of Yu-Gi-Oh disagrees. He's not selfish. The bad guy is, obviously. Releasing the power of both blades traps whatever Miller has become, turning the sky dark as night. All across the underworld, Kirito's friends give him their thoughts and prayers, which grants him unfathomable power. He goes in to finish Miller off, but he is broken free. The two battle, and Kirito gets his arm cut off. Yu-Gi-Oh appears again, taking up his falling sword, and together, he and Kirito defeat Evil Incarnate. The server reaches maximum acceleration and forces everyone to log out. Kirito flies to the floating pastoral platform to make sure Asuna and Alice made it out in time. And it hits him. He'll be stuck there for the next 200 years, and he breaks down. Only to hear Asuna's voice. She had stayed behind. Rinko retrieves Alice's light cube, relieved to find that Alice's memories are intact, and thanks Kirito for protecting them. Asuna tells Rinko that she will stay behind in the underworld with Kirito as the system enters maximum acceleration. She promises to take care of him and keep him safe until he wakes up. Meanwhile, Miller returns to the real world, only to discover his own dead body. Alicia appears, his first victim, and tells him they get to spend eternity together as the floor turns liquid with hands reaching up to drag him below. Critter walks in to find Miller's corpse. He turns and sees Vasagos as well. Freaked out, he doesn't dwell on the logic or feasibility of the situation. He and the remaining mercenaries decide to dip. But before leaving, they rig the ocean turtle's main engine with explosives to destroy the facility and cover their tracks. However, Akihiko Kayaba, the creator of the original Sword Art Online, is somehow still around and able to control one of the installation's robots. He decides to disarm the bomb to save everyone, which is a first for Kayaba. On his initial attempt, the robot breaks down, but the mere mention of Kirito's ability to do the impossible gives Robot Kayaba a second wind, and he successfully disarms the bomb. Kirito and Asuna leave the World's End altar. All they have to do is live like 3 lifetimes before getting booted, which shouldn't have too much of an effect on them. Rinko holds a press conference to introduce Alice, now autonomous, with her Fluctlight implanted into an android. Alice puts a few reporters in their place, with some intro to philosophy rebuttals to all their ethical concerns, concerning life, the universe, and everything. Higa continues to watch over Kirito and Asuna, along with Kikuoka, who was officially declared dead as part of the cover-up for the incident. Alice notices that Kirito is waking up and unceremoniously checks out of the interview, leaving everyone hanging. Once Kirito comes to, he tells Alice that her sister is basically cryogenically frozen in the central cathedral, waiting for her. He then asks Higa to erase all of his and Asuna's memories of the past 200 years they spent together, ruling over the underworld as king and queen. While recuperating at the hospital, Kirito and Asuna are visited by Kikuoka, who tells them that he has a plan, or at least a hope, to prevent the government from seizing the underworld and its residents. Elsewhere, Higa talks to a copy of Kirito that he made before the memory deletion. Digital Kirito asks for his help in contacting Kayaba to look for a way to maintain the underworld in case the government interferes. At home, Kirito mourns Yujio's death. Sugu comes into his room and asks him to tell her his story. Kirito receives a call from Rinko. She tells him that Alice has made a break for it and is now MIA. He then receives a package and finds that Alice shipped herself to his house, inconspicuously using a box labeled Wrath. She loses it on Kirito for staying behind in the underworld. To help her adjust better, he shows her the family dojo, and they spar, only to break the training swords because of their immense power. At dinner, his family celebrates his release from the hospital while expressing concern about everything that happened and what it means for his real future in the world, with physical people. That night, Alice receives a cryptic email. She shows it to Kirito, and they figure out that it might connect to the underworld. Along with Asuna, they head over to what's left of Wrath to test their theory of entering the underworld via the IP address from the secret coded message. They log in and find themselves in outer space with a view of a planet that is probably the underworld. 2 spaceships suddenly appear and seem to be piloted by Ronnie and Tisei's descendants, who are being chased by a giant space monster. Kirito steps in with Asuna and Alice to slay the interstellar behemoth with their swords, since they are gods now who can propel themselves through space wearing medieval armor. The Integrity pilots, named mostly due to lack of imagination, not tradition, immediately recognize them, and Yujio's Force Ghost, who's thrown into the mix. They obviously know them through some form of genetic memory. Teary-eyed, they're beside themselves at seeing the legendary heroes of the underworld as they fly back home. The public is weary in the aftermath of the Sword Art Online incident, which prompts the shift from VR to AR, augmented reality. One company dominates with the Ogma, the most popular peripheral used to play ordinal scale. It's like LARPing, but with a fancy headpiece, and an insanely realistic AI idol, Yuna, who everyone loves and knows her songs, yada yada, idols. Kirito gets sucked into playing by Asuna and company when Aincrad bosses begin appearing around Tokyo. One night, they join Klein in Akihabara to fight Kagachi, the samurai lord. Before the event starts, Yuna shows up to serenade the players, giving them all a buff. It's Kirito's first real activity after being stuck in bed for 2 years due to SAO, so he has some trouble keeping up physically, and can't RP to save his life. Asuna and Klein don't have that problem, being prolific OS players. Suddenly, a rocket veers off course, heading straight for Yuna, but a player watching from the shadows springs into action and saves her before helping out with the boss. Right before Asuna lands the final blow, she passes the mystery player, who whispers, "Switch." Everyone gets a big points boost for defeating the boss, and Asuna gets an additional reward for being the event's MVP. It turns out the mystery player, Eiji, is ranked second overall. The number 1 spot is oddly empty. He also seems to know Asuna from SAO and calls her by her real name. The following night, Asuna joins Klein and his gang to battle another boss. Cut off from his friends, Eiji appears and starts sadistically toying with the isolated Klein. After the battle, Yuna tries to congratulate Asuna again, calling her by name this time, and Klein is nowhere to be found. On the MMO network, they find out that there's a book about SAO and what happened during the 2 years it was online. The book contains a detailed list of players who were trapped in SAO. The next day, Yui encourages an out-of-shape Kirito to practice sword skills in AR. When he activates Ordinal Scale, a girl hooded in white appears, seems to speak but not audibly, points in a direction, and then quickly disappears. Asuna shows up and confirms that Eiji was in her SAO guild, Knights of the Blood Oath, under the name Nautilus. The gang meets in Alfheim Online, and Yui grabs everyone's attention to announce her findings looking into Ordinal Scale and the reason behind the Aincrad boss cameos. By overlaying a map of SAO dungeons on top of that of Tokyo, she found they overlap with the recent appearances of the bosses. She uses this information to predict where the next boss events will be, and they're all concerned about Klein's absence. Elsewhere, Eiji talks with Yuna while crossing off names in his copy of the SAO book. That night, Kirito is paid a quick visit by the hooded virtual girl again, who's again super cryptic, and points again, and disappears again. Kirito then receives a call from Egil, who breaks the news about Klein's hospitalization. Meanwhile, Asuna, Silica, and Liz attend another boss event. Eiji and Yuna are there again. He talks to Asuna and confirms his identity before he reverts back to cracked out psychopath mode. Kirito shows up while the battle is underway, just in time to watch Silica get straight up pranked when Pina, her pet from ALO, appears. But it's not Pina, and it quickly morphs into another powerful boss from the 91st floor. Eiji pushes Silica to the ground and stands there waiting to watch her get finished off. But Asuna jumps in and protects her, taking the attack herself. This triggers a flash of her memories from SAO, while a drone flies by and collects a glowing sphere from Asuna's Ogma. Completely oblivious to all of the weirdness of what just happened, Yuna bids farewell to Asuna and leaves. The hooded girl watches them from a distance. Kirito drops Asuna off at home. Beginning to forget her time in SAO, she asks him about how they first met. Later that night, she realizes how serious the gap in her memory is, contacts Kirito to meet up in ALO, and admits her memory loss. The next day, they go to the hospital, where they learn that many SAO survivors have been affected by memory loss, presumably due to some unknown function of the Ogma. Later, they tour Aincrad, as it's recreated in ALO, but nothing jogs her memory. She breaks down in their cabin and tells Kirito that she's afraid of losing him and their memories together. Elsewhere, Eiji strokes his own ego about how he's better at AR than the two best SAO players. Kirito visits Klein, who's still in the hospital with a mangled arm and suffering the same kind of amnesia as Asuna. He decides to take matters into his own hands and attend more events to figure out what's going on. He warns his friends not to play OS until he solves the mystery. Despite his warning, Sinon shows up at the next boss fight. She reminds him that she doesn't have any SAO memories to lose anyway. She's a GGO girl. During the boss battle, someone is taken out, and a drone swoops in and scoops up the glowing orange sphere that is their extracted memories. Yui sees it and jets off after it into the drone, but before she can discover anything, she's locked out by a firewall. After the battle, Kirito sees the mysterious girl hooded in white again. He is pissed. She doesn't respond to his questions. She just pops up out of nowhere, points, and disappears. Sinon notices his frustration and asks him what's going on. At last, Kirito puts it together that all the pointing was, in fact, communication, and asks Yui to sort out what she was pointing at from each location that she appeared. Bam! All the pointing intersects at the Toto Institute of Technology, where the Ogma's creator, Tetsuhiro Shigemura, is a professor. Kirito attends one of his lectures, and afterwards, in his office, accuses him of being behind the memory thefts. Shigemura feigns ignorance and tries to spin losing SAO memories as a good thing for the survivors. On his way out, Kirito notices a picture on his desk that looks exactly like Yuna, the AI idol. He realizes that she is Shigemura's daughter, who died in the SAO incident. Kirito visits Asuna at her place. Alone in her room, he finds her diary and, without hesitation, completely invades her privacy. He discovers that she doesn't remember his promise to take her camping. She catches him reading it, but doesn't mind, and even invites him to read it all. Elsewhere, Yuna is excited about her upcoming stadium concert. She asks Eiji to read more of the SAO book to her, specifically about him. But he's embarrassed to say he's not even mentioned in it at all. He admits that he was weak and cowardly in SAO, hence his current overcompensation in AR. Meanwhile, Kirito walks home and gets ambushed by the hooded ghost girl, who turns out to be another version of Yuna. She transports him to a virtual space that resembles Aincrad. He starts questioning her, but she just breaks into song. He wants to know what he needs to do to get Asuna's memories back. And the only somewhat useful thing that Ghost Yuna says is that he's not strong enough to do that yet. She then tells him to wake up and snaps her fingers, sending him back to reality. He comes to in a bush with a cop standing over him, who doesn't even get his name or question him at all. Apparently, it's a normal enough thing for kids to be waking up in the bushes. Kirito continues his quest for answers and hits up every boss battle he can, fighting recklessly, risking his memories, but leveling up like the Dickens. Eiji finally shows up, and Kirito tries to fight him, but he can't match his speed and strength since Eiji is using elite hacks. The night of the concert, the gang finds their seats and wonders where Kirito is. He's in the parking garage, about to face off with Eiji again. He calls him by his SAO name, Nautilus, and he gets butthurt and whines that his name is Eiji now. Instead of dealing with the very real problem of people's memories being erased, they decide to settle things by LARPing in ordinal scale. Meanwhile, Shigemura watches the concert from his lab and talks to himself, or to Kaiba's Force Ghost? Or maybe it's his fantasy of Kaiba's Force Ghost ego-stroking his plan to revive Yuna using SAO survivors' memories. Eiji tells Kirito that he loved Yuna in SAO and that he wants to bring her back to life, and reveals that he's working with Shigemura to collect SAO memories for Yuna's revival project. Now that Kirito has some idea of what's going on, he disables Eiji's OP hack device, wrecks him, and goes to join his friends. Then, Shigemura tells Eiji that he'll be using his memories of Yuna as well, since he has the most data on her. A predictable betrayal. The same boss he sicked on Silica appears and attacks Eiji, who doesn't take off his Ogma because, well, the plot requires that he doesn't. Shigemura waits to steal the memories of everyone at the concert, causing panic as monsters fill the stadium after Yuna finishes a single song. Some of the audience think it's a special event, a part of the show, and start fighting. Hooded Ghost Yuna confronts her father and tries to stop him, but he says it's too late. He's come too close to stop now. Her father's a lost cause, so she zips down to Kirito and fills him in. He tries to get people to remove their Ogma devices, but that would be way too easy. Yuna tells him that they need to use the Ogma's hidden full dive capabilities to dive into Aincrad and defeat the 100th floor boss, because that will stop Shigemoto's plan, somehow. He agrees and leaves Asuna to watch over their unconscious bodies. Kirito and the others full dive into Aincrad and face the boss, but they are overwhelmed by its power. Asuna, despite not remembering anything from SAO, seems to intuitively understand that nothing properly gets done without her involvement. She and Yui gather their friends from ALO to join the fight, and they transfer their old gear and skills from SAO, giving them an advantage. They manage to defeat the boss with pure, unadulterated friendship and clear SAO for real-ish, ignoring like 24 other bosses. Kirito receives the strongest sword in the game as a reward, and everyone else gets nothing but the friends they made along the way. They return to the stadium, having stopped Shigemoto's plan. Kikuoka finds the professor in his lab and arrests him. The gang meets in Egil's bar, while Kirito and Asuna go on their camping trip. He finally proposes to her, in the real, and a meteor shower lights up the night sky. Thank you for sticking until the end. Subscribe for more videos like this.